Hi guys, welcome to my channel. Have you ever wondered what dark secrets lie hidden beneath sacred temples around the world? Today's video dives deep into those mysteries. Let's begin and uncover the chilling truths together. Beneath the sun-bleached sprawl of an ancient city where incense curled lazily in the warm air and the slow, deep clang of bronze bells drifted across the rooftops, the temple stood like a sentinel of eternity. It had been there for longer than anyone could remember, longer than the walls of the city, longer even than the memory of the language spoken by the first worshippers who laid its stones. Its massive pillars, carved with spiraling vines and beasts no living eyes had seen in centuries, rose from the marble courtyard like frozen trees, each one weathered by centuries of wind, rain, and the ceaseless touch of countless pilgrims' hands. From the steps, a traveler could look down across the city and see the web of narrow streets and shadowed alleys winding toward the harbor, where slow-moving ships with weathered sails drifted lazily upon the blue water. But within the walls of the temple, the city seemed far away, and the air changed thicker, cooler, almost as if the stones themselves were breathing. Local guides told stories to the pilgrims who came from far away, softly spoken tales of miracles, of prayers answered in the dead of night, of visions seen in candlelight. But they also spoke of other things, quieter still, whispers of locked doors beneath the altar, of chambers that had never been opened, in living memory of sounds like distant footsteps echoing from the earth when no one else was inside. No one ever lingered alone after dark. The high priests, robed in gold-threaded linen, insisted that the temple's deepest places were only for the eyes of the divine, and that to trespass there was to risk not only one's life, but one's soul. But history has never been content with locked doors. The temple's foundations were older than its walls, older even than the city itself. Archaeologists, who came in waves over the centuries, left with more questions than answers. The outer halls were a palimpsest of empires. The columns bore the marks of 3 different dynasties, each carving over the work of the last. The floor tiles in one corridor had come from a quarry more than 100 miles away, carried here over mountains before the wheel was ever invented. But beneath it all was something else, a layer of worked stone that did not match any known period, harder than granite, scored with strange symbols that no scholar had ever managed to decipher. It was in the last days of the summer heat that an excavation team received permission to work within the temple's outer grounds. They were given strict limits, only certain rooms, only during daylight hours, and never beneath the central sanctum. The priests watched them closely, their expressions unreadable, as if guarding not just the temple, but the land itself. On the second day, a young archaeologist named Elias was sent to examine a sunken courtyard at the temple's southern edge. The courtyard was choked with weeds, its flagstones split and uneven, as if the earth beneath had shifted long ago. In the center stood a toppled statue, its face worn smooth by centuries of rain. The statue's base had cracked, revealing what looked like the top of a stone shaft, disappearing into darkness. Elias called the others, and together they cleared the weeds and rubble. The shaft was wide enough for a man to descend, though it was lined with a narrow spiral of steps that looked treacherous with age. The stone was not the same as the rest of the courtyard. It was darker, flecked with strange mineral veins, and each step bore a shallow groove down its center, as if worn smooth by countless feet long before the courtyard had ever been built. The priests arrived within minutes, They ordered the shaft sealed immediately, their voices sharp, their faces pale. "There is nothing there for you," the high priest said. That night, long after the temple gates were closed, Elias lay awake in the small room the team had rented in the city. The air was heavy, carrying the distant hum of chanting from the temple's night rituals. He could not stop thinking of the shaft, of the steps curling down into the earth. He imagined the feel of the stone under his fingers, the cool air rising from below, the way the darkness seemed not empty, but full of something ancient and waiting. The city slept fitfully, dogs barking in the alleys, shutters creaking in the warm wind. But Elias felt as though the temple was awake, watching. By the fourth day, the team had been reassigned away from the courtyard entirely. Officially, it was for safety reasons, the cracked stone, the risk of collapse, but the unspoken truth was clear. The priests would not allow them near it again. Still, something had shifted in Elias. He had come here to study history, but now he felt history reaching for him, tugging at the edges of his mind. He began walking alone through the temple at dusk, lingering in the shadows, tracing his fingers along the carved walls. And once, in the stillness, just after sunset, he heard it, the sound of stone moving somewhere far below, as if a door had opened in the depths. Elias had grown up with the certainty that the past was something to be studied from a safe distance. In lecture halls and dusty libraries, he had always seen it framed behind glass, interpreted through the neat labels and careful theories of experts. But now, as the days passed under the looming presence of the temple, that certainty began to feel thin. The temple was not something dead, and still it was alive in a way he could not explain. It seemed to breathe, to change its mood with the hour. In the mornings, when the first sunlight spilled over its steps, it was a place of open air and birdsong, incense drifting on the breeze. By afternoon, the shadows pooled in the corners of the colonnades, and the sound of chanting from unseen rooms rose like the drone of bees. But at night, when the great bronze gates were closed and the streets outside lay empty, the temple seemed to sink into itself, holding its breath in the darkness. It was on the fifth night that he returned to the southern courtyard. The guards did not expect anyone to be foolish enough to wander there after dark, and besides, he had been careful to learn the rhythms of the patrols. He wrapped himself in a plain robe, the sort worn by common pilgrims, and slipped through the twisting streets until the temple's outer wall loomed ahead. He had already found a narrow postern gate used by servants to bring in supplies and locked at this hour to allow the night's offerings to be carried to the kitchens. He walked quickly, head bowed, blending into the flow of quiet figures moving toward the temple with bundles of fruit and sacks of grain. The southern courtyard was still, its cracked stones silver in the moonlight. The weeds whispered faintly in the wind. Elias's heart thudded as he knelt beside the toppled statue and touched the cold edge of the shaft. The priests had sealed it crudely, stacking heavy flagstones across the opening and filling the cracks with mortar, but they had been in haste. At the edge, one stone had not been set firmly, and with slow, silent effort, he pried it up enough to squeeze through. Cold air rushed up from below, smelling faintly of damp stone and something else's scent almost metallic, like old coins or blood. He lowered himself onto the steps, his lantern wrapped in cloth to dim its light. The stone beneath his feet felt oddly smooth, polished not by tools but by time. He descended slowly, spiraling deeper, each step curving just enough that he could never see more than a few paces ahead. The walls were close, and when he brushed his hand along them, he felt shallow carving symbols that were neither letters nor pictures, but patterns of lines and curves that seemed to shift slightly under his fingertips, as if the stone itself remembered being shaped. The air grew cooler, and the silence deepened. The only sound was the faint drip of water somewhere below. After what felt like an hour, the steps ended at a narrow landing. Before him stretched a corridor of the same dark stone, low-ceilinged and utterly without decoration. His lantern's dim glow revealed no dust, no cobwebs, as if the passage had been swept clean recently. Elias hesitated. He had expected abandonment, the stillness of centuries. But instead he felt the faint hum of presence, like walking into a room someone had just left. He moved forward, the soles of his boots making no sound on the stone. The corridor sloped gently downward, and after a dozen paces, he came to an arched doorway. Beyond it lay a chamber unlike anything he had seen in the temple above. The walls curved inward, forming a perfect circle, and in the center was a pool of still water, black as obsidian. A single thin beam of light fell from far above, catching the surface and scattering faint reflections across the walls. Around the pool's edge stood 6 stone figures, their faces hidden beneath deep hoods, hands pressed together as if in prayer. They were carved with such precision that Elias half expected them to move. He knelt by the water's edge and dipped his fingers into the surface. The water was icy cold, but when he pulled his hand back, it was dry as if the liquid had not been water at all. Frowning, he leaned closer, and in the reflected glow of his lantern, he saw that the surface was not reflecting him. It was showing something else. A corridor, lined with torches, leading into darkness. His breath caught. He turned to glance over his shoulder. Behind him, the corridor was empty, silent. But when he looked back at the water, the vision remained. Then, without warning, the beam of light from above flickered, as if something had passed in front of it. The reflection in the pool changed. Now he saw the 6 hooded statues, but their heads were turned toward him. He jerked back, his breath quickening, but when he looked up, the statues had not moved. The air in the chamber was colder now, and the silence felt heavier, pressing against his ears. Somewhere, faintly, he heard the sound of stone grinding against stone, as if a door had been opened nearby. A narrow passage branched off to the left of the chamber, half hidden behind one of the statues. It was little more than a crack in the wall, but beyond it he could see another set of steps descending into shadow. Against his better judgment, Elias squeezed through. These steps were narrower, the walls closing in until he had to turn sideways to pass. The carvings here were deeper, sharper, and his fingers came away faintly warm, though the air was cold. The steps ended in a small chamber, no larger than a storeroom. In the center was a stone altar, its surface covered in shallow depressions shaped like hands. Above it, set into the wall, was a single metal disc, blackened with age, but gleaming faintly as if it had been polished recently. He reached out, and as his fingertips brushed the metal, a deep vibration thrummed through the stone beneath his feet. The carvings along the walls seemed to ripple, and a low, resonant hum filled the chamber. Elias staggered back, heart pounding, as a seam appeared in the far wall. It widened, stone folding away to reveal a black void beyond. From that darkness came a faint sound, slow, deliberate footsteps approaching. Elias's lantern sputtered. The flame guttered, throwing long, jagged shadows across the walls. The footsteps drew closer, though he could see nothing in the doorway. The hum deepened, and a strange pressure filled the air, making it hard to breathe. His instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs felt rooted to the floor. Then, just as the lantern went out entirely, he heard a whisper low, ancient, speaking in a language he did not know but somehow understood. "You are not the first." For a moment, Elias stood in perfect darkness, the whisper still curling in his mind like smoke that refused to dissipate. "You are not the first." The words did not fade, they echoed without sound, as though they had been pressed into his very bones. His breath came fast, and he could hear his heartbeat pounding in his ears. He tried to move, to step back toward the narrow stair, but the air around him felt thick, almost liquid, and every motion was slowed as if he were pushing through deep water. Then, with a faint click, a new light bloomed from somewhere beyond the black opening. It was not fire, nor the pale glow of the moon. It was a dull, bluish radiance, seeping from cracks in the stone walls, as though the rock itself had begun to glow. The void beyond the doorway was no longer empty. It stretched into a vast chamber, so wide that the far wall was lost in darkness, the faint blue light pooling across the floor like mist. The ceiling was low near the doorway, but it arched higher and higher toward the unseen distance, vanishing into shadow. Elias stepped forward cautiously, his hands brushing the walls as he passed through. The stone was warm here, humming faintly, and the carvings were unlike those he had seen above, less abstract, more like twisted forms of living things, eyes without faces, hands that reached upward from the ground, shapes that might have been roots or veins, winding in patterns that made his head ache if he stared too long. The air was cooler now and carried a strange metallic taste. As he walked deeper, he became aware of a sound beneath the silence, a deep, slow pulse, like the beat of some enormous heart buried far below. It did not seem to come from one direction. Rather, it filled the chamber, vibrating in his ribs. He could not tell if it was truly a sound or simply the memory of one, echoing from a time beyond memory. After several minutes of careful steps, he came upon something that stopped him entirely. In the center of the chamber stood a massive stone disc, tilted slightly and half sunken into the floor. Its surface was covered in a spiral of symbols, each one connected to the next by thin, branching lines. The faint blue light seemed to collect along these lines, tracing them in a slow, pulsing rhythm, as though the symbols were alive. Around the base of the disc lay fragments of something metallic, thin strips, corroded but still sharp-edged. Elias crouched, picking up a piece. It was lighter than he expected, almost weightless, and when he turned it in his hand, it caught the glow in a way that made it look briefly liquid before returning to dull metal. His thoughts were racing now. Nothing in the temple above hinted at anything like this. This chamber was older, much older than the walls and altars above ground. He thought of the smooth, worn steps, the carvings that did not match any known language, the way the priests had forbidden them from even approaching the shaft. They knew, they had always known. Whatever this place was, it was not meant for the eyes of the world. A sudden movement caught his attention. Across the chamber, barely visible in the dim light, a shadow detached itself from the wall. It moved slowly, with a strange, deliberate grace, gliding rather than walking. Elias froze, straining to see more clearly, but the figure stayed just at the edge of sight. Then it paused, and he felt rather than Syed's attention turned fully toward him. The pulse in the chamber deepened, growing heavier, until it was all he could feel. The figure began to approach. As it drew closer, the blue light fell across its form. It was humanoid in shape, but impossibly tall, its limbs elongated, its skin the same dark stone as the walls, veined with faintly glowing lines. Where its face should have been, there was only smooth, featureless rock. Yet Elias had no doubt that it was looking directly at him. His instincts screamed at him to retreat, but some deeper part of him, some quiet, irrational thread of curiosity, held him in place. The figure stopped a few paces away, towering over him. Slowly, it lifted one long arm and extended a hand toward the stone disk. Its fingers brushed the spiral of symbols, and the glow along the lines brightened sharply, flaring outward until the entire disk was bathed in cold light. Images struck Ilias's mind in rapid succession, not seen with his eyes, but burned into his thoughts. He saw the temple above as it had been in an age long forgotten, not a place of worship, but a fortress, its towers gleaming with metal and stone, unlike anything in the modern world. He saw processions of figures like the one before him, carrying objects of impossible design, their steps echoing in vast underground halls. He saw the sea rise and fall in moments, swallowing cities whole, and the land cracking open to swallow the fortress itself. Then, just as suddenly, the images were gone, leaving him dizzy and breathless. The figure lowered its hand and turned its faceless head toward him. In the same voiceless whisper that had greeted him before, it spoke. The seal must hold. Elias tried to speak, to ask what it meant, but his voice came out as a rasp. The figure stepped back into the shadows, and as it did, the blue light along the walls began to fade. The pulse in the chamber slowed, becoming fainter and fainter, until it was gone entirely. Alone again, Elias stood in the dim glow that still clung faintly to the stone disk. He felt an urgent need to leave, not out of fear, though that was still there, but because he knew the moment was ending, and whatever door had opened for him was closing fast. He retraced his steps toward the narrow stair, glancing back once to see if the figure remained. There was nothing, only the endless darkness of the chamber beyond. When he emerged into the circular pool room, the beam of light from above had returned, steady and pale. The 6 hooded statues stood exactly as before, unmoved. Yet he could not shake the feeling that their hidden faces were following him. As he crossed the room, at the base of the spiral stairs, he paused, looking up toward the faint glimmer of moonlight far above. The climb seemed much longer now. When he finally reached the surface and stepped into the courtyard, the air felt heavy with the scent of incense and the distant sound of chanting. He glanced toward the temple's main hall and saw movement figures in gold-threaded robes watching from the shadows of the colonnade. Their faces were unreadable, but he knew they had seen him, and he knew, beyond any doubt, that his presence in the depths would not go unanswered. The courtyard was quiet, except for the low drone of chanting drifting from the main sanctuary. But Elias could feel a weight in the air that had nothing to do with sound. The gold-robed figures had not moved from their place in the shadows. They stood in a row, perfectly still, their faces hidden beneath tall headdresses, the flickering torchlight casting strange shapes across their features. Elias took a slow step toward the open archway leading back to the outer corridors, but the line of priests seemed to shift in unison, their movements barely perceptible, yet undeniably intentional, like the subtle realignment of predators circling prey. A voice spoke from the center of the group. It was low, measured, carrying neither warmth nor anger, but an implacable certainty that made the hair on the back of his neck rise. "You have gone where you were not invited." The high priest stepped forward, the gold of his robes shimmering faintly in the moonlight. His eyes were fixed on Elias, unblinking. Few in living memory have returned from the path you have walked. Fewer still with their minds intact. Elias tried to muster an explanation, a claim of innocent curiosity, of archaeological interest, but the words stuck in his throat. It wasn't fear alone that silenced him. It was the awareness that any answer he gave would mean nothing to these men. They were not concerned with academic inquiry. They were guardians, the memory of the faceless figures, words, or against who. The high priest gestured toward two of the robed figures. Without a word, they approached Elias, their steps perfectly synchronized. One extended a hand, not roughly, but with a quiet authority that allowed no refusal. Elias felt their grip close around his armlight, yet firm enough to suggest that resistance would be useless. They guided him away from the courtyard, deeper into the temple, the sound of their footsteps swallowed by the heavy silence of the inner corridors. The route they took was unfamiliar. It twisted through narrow halls, lit only by oil lamps set into the walls at irregular intervals, their light too dim to reach the high ceilings. The air here was thicker, warmer, carrying a faint scent of herbs and something sharper, ozone perhaps, or the faint electric temps of air before a storm. The further they walked, the more Elias felt the outside world slipping away, until the idea of the city beyond the temple walls seemed almost unreal. At last, they reached a chamber whose doors were made of massive slabs of wood bound with bronze. The high priest stepped forward and pressed his palm to a small indentation in the metal. With a low groan, the doors swung inward. Inside, the space was lit by hundreds of candles arranged in concentric circles around a raised platform at the center. On the platform stood an object covered by a heavy cloth, its shape indistinct but tall, almost as high as a man. The priests led Elias to the edge of the platform, then released him and stepped back, forming a half circle that faced inward. The high priest's voice broke the silence. "You have seen what lies below. You have touched the stone that was not meant for your hands. Now you will see why we guard it." He reached up and drew the cloth away. Beneath it stood a tall monolith of the same dark, veined stone as the shaft's spiral steps. Its surface was carved with the same shifting patterns Elias had felt under his fingers in the depths. Lines and curves that seemed to move when viewed from the corner of the eye. The blue glow he had seen below pulsed faintly within the carvings, as if some unseen current flowed through the stone. This, the high priest said, was brought here before the first walls of the city were laid. It is not of our world. His eyes never left Elias. It is a key and a lock. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Elias found his voice at last. A lock against what? The high priest's expression did not change. Against what remains. There are things older than time, as we measure it, things that walked this land when the seas were in different places and the sky was not as it is now. They left behind their tools, their prisons, and their warnings. We are the last to remember. And so we keep the doors closed. Elias swallowed. I saw one of them. The whisper of the chamber's faceless figure still tingled in his memory. It spoke to me. At this, a ripple passed through the surrounding priests. The high priest's gaze sharpened, the faintest shadow of concern passing over his features. Then it knows the seal weakens, he said quietly. And if it spoke, it has marked you. The candles seemed to gutter at his words, their flames bending inward as though drawn toward the monolith. Elias felt an almost magnetic pull toward the stone, a subtle pressure urging him to place his hands against its surface. He clenched his fists to resist. The high priest noticed. "You feel it," he said. "That is how it begins. The pull will grow stronger. You will dream of it. In time, you would seek it out again then, without our permission. And if you touched the wrong mark in the wrong way," he let the sentence fade, but the implication was clear. One of the priests stepped forward, carrying a small bowl filled with a dark, viscous liquid. He held it out toward Elios. The high priest nodded. "Drink, it will dull the connection." For a time, Elios hesitated, his mind torn between suspicion and the lingering compulsion to obey. The liquid smelled faintly of bitter herbs and something mineral, like water drawn from deep underground. Slowly, he lifted the bowl and drank. The taste was unpleasant, coating his tongue with an earthy bitterness that seemed to sink into his chest. Within moments, the pull toward the monolith lessened, the urge fading to a distant echo. The high priest spoke again, his tone softer now. "You will leave this place before the next moon rises. You will not speak of what you have seen. If you do, those who hear will think you maddened. Worse, they will come searching. We cannot allow that." Elias opened his mouth to protest, but the priest raised a hand. "This is not a threat, it is protection. For you, for all." The candles flickered again, and for the briefest instant, the monolith's glow brightened. Elias thought he saw something shift within the stone-like, a shadow moving just beneath the surface. The high priest's gaze snapped toward it, his expression tightening. Then he turned back to Elias. "Go sleep, and pray the seal holds a little longer." The high priest's command left no space for debate. Elias found himself guided away from the candlelit chamber, the doors closing behind him with a dull, final thud that echoed through the stone corridors. The two silent escorts who had led him in now walked behind him, their presence a constant reminder that whatever choice he thought he still had was an illusion. The corridors wound in a different pattern this time. Past rooms he had not seen before, storerooms filled with clay jars sealed with wax, narrow alcoves where robed novices knelt in silent prayer, a long hall whose walls were covered entirely in black cloth, concealing whatever lay beneath. When they reached the outer colonnade, the air felt almost thin with openness. The night was still, the moon hanging low over the city's rooftops. The priests said nothing as they released him, only turning away and vanishing back into the temple's deeper shadows. Elias stood there for a long moment, unsure if he should run or walk. In the end, he moved quickly, but without obvious haste, his steps echoing against the marble steps as he descended into the narrow streets below. The city was quieter than he remembered, as though something in its atmosphere had shifted. Market stalls stood empty under their awnings, and the few figures he passed kept their heads down, their faces hidden. When he reached the small room he was renting, he found the door slightly ajar. Inside, nothing had been touched, yet the air carried the same faint metallic temps he had smelled in the depths beneath the temple. He closed the door, bolted it, and leaned against it, breathing slowly until his heartbeat settled. That night, he dreamed. In the dream, he was back in the circular pool chamber, the still water at its center, reflecting not the room around him, but the spiral of symbols carved into the great stone disk he had seen in the blue-lit chamber. The symbols pulsed in time with his heartbeat, brighter with each breath he took. Then, from the far side of the pool, the faceless figure emerged, its towering form silent and smooth as it moved. It raised a hand, and with a gesture, the reflection in the pool changed. Now it showed the city above but in ruins, its streets flooded with black water, the temple's pillars broken and half submerged. Above it all, the sky was the wrong color, a dull red haze shot through with jagged streaks of white. The figure's whisper slid into his mind. The seal will break. You will open it. Elias woke in darkness, drenched in cold sweat. The dream clung to him like damp cloth, every detail as vivid as though he had truly been there. His mouth was dry, his tongue coated with the bitter aftertaste of the priest's potion. In the stillness, he thought he heard a faint, rhythmic sound, like the pulse of the chamber beneath the temple, but when he held his breath to listen, it was gone. The following day, he tried to continue his work as though nothing had happened, but the temple loomed over every street, its shadow stretching far beyond its walls. Wherever he went, he felt watched, not only by the priests, but by something else, something unseen, yet impossibly close. The market vendors greeted him politely enough, but their eyes slid away quickly, and no one lingered in conversation. Once, as he turned a corner, he caught sight of a gold-robed priest standing at the far end of the street, motionless in the crowd. When Elias blinked, the man was gone. That night, the dream returned. This time, he stood not by the pool, but before the great monolith in the candlelit chamber. The carvings moved openly now, their lines flowing like molten metal across the stone. From within the shifting patterns, shapes began to emerge, hands pressing outward, as though something inside the stone were trying to break free. The high priest appeared beside him in the dream, his face pale, his eyes hard. "Do not touch it," he said. But when Elias looked down, his hands were already pressed against the surface. The glow flared so brightly, it burned away the room, leaving only blackness. In that blackness, the faceless figure's voice came again. "You are not the first, but you may be the last." He awoke, gasping, the air in his room colder than it should have been. The metallic temps was stronger now, almost choking. Somewhere in the distance, he thought he heard the slow grinding of stone on stone, like the shifting of a great door. By the third night, he could no longer sleep without seeing the figure, the disc, the visions of the drowned city. He began to notice strange things in waking life. Two patterns in the cracks of the walls that resembled the carvings beneath the temple. The flicker of blue light in the corner of his vision when no source could be found. The steady pulse in his ears that matched the rhythm of the stone's glow. He avoided the temple, but it didn't matter. The temple was inside him now. On the morning of the fourth day, he found a folded scrap of parchment slipped under his door. There were no words, only a single symbol drawn in dark Inca spiral of lines branching outward, identical to the pattern on the stone disc. The moment he touched it, a shiver passed through him, and he heard the whisper again, clear as if someone stood beside him. The seal must hold, but there was no one there. That night, the city shook. It was a subtle tremor, just enough to rattle loose tiles from the rooftops and send a few market stalls crashing down. But Elias knew it was not an earthquake. In his dreams, he saw the spiral disc again, and this time, a crack ran across its surface, blue light pouring out into the darkness. He left the city before dawn, carrying only what he could fit into a small pack. The road outwound into the hills, giving him one last view of the temple from a distance. In the cold morning light, it looked eternal, unshaken, its pillars rising proudly against the sky. But Elias knew better. Somewhere far below those stones, the seal was weakening, the figure was waiting, and whether by his will or not, he would return. The whisper followed him into the hills, fading only when the temple was out of sight. You are not the first. Nestled deep within the dense, mist-shrouded mountains of a forgotten region, the temple stood isolated, surrounded by towering pines whose branches intertwined overhead, blotting out the sky. The path that led to its weathered gates was nearly lost beneath fallen leaves and tangled roots. For centuries, the locals had whispered about the temple, calling it by a name they dared not speak aloud, and telling stories of a presence that watched from within, neither entirely hostile nor welcoming. The temple's walls were formed of dark basalt stone, mottled with moss and lichen, their surfaces carved with patterns that seemed to ripple beneath the shifting fog. Its architecture was unlike any other in the region, angular, almost brutalist in its simplicity, yet marked by strange, almost alien motifs, stylized serpents with too many eyes, geometric shapes that suggested constellations unknown to modern astronomy, and figures with elongated limbs that appeared to move when viewed from different angles. The massive doors, wrought iron blackened by time, bore the faint impression of symbols that glowed faintly in the dark, like embers of a dying fire. No official records mentioned the temple's origin. Local elders recalled only vague tales passed down in hushed voices, stories of an ancient sect that had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only this monolith of stone and silence. It was said that the temple was built to contain something, a power too vast and terrible for the world above, and that those who entered without permission risked not just death, but madness. When the team arrived, they brought with them the tools of modern archaeology, ground-penetrating radar, drones equipped with thermal imaging, and advanced geophysical sensors. Yet even their instruments returned strange readings. Beneath the temple, vast cavities appeared on scans, filled not with air or earth, but something else, something denser, colder, almost impenetrable. The magnetic fields fluctuated wildly near the temple's core, and electronic devices frequently malfunctioned, as if the very stone interfered with technology. Among the group was Dr. Moran Caldwell, a seasoned anthropologist whose curiosity was matched only by her caution. She had heard the legends, but was determined to document the temple before time, weather, and neglect erased it entirely, as if the temple's dark stone had eyes that watched and judged. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the silence was occasionally broken by the distant call of birds, or the rustle of small animals in the undergrowth. But beneath the serenity lay an oppressive weight. The steps descended sharply, disappearing into darkness below the temple floor. The air that wafted up from the opening was cold and stale, carrying a faint scent of burnt incense and something metallic, like old rust or dried blood. The other team members were hesitant, fearing structural instability or worse. But Marin's resolve only deepened. Over the next days, they carefully cleared the stairwell, uncovering inscriptions etched into the stone that seemed to pulse faintly under their flashlights. The language was unlike any known script, composed of angular glyphs interspersed with swirling patterns that defied classification. Marin recorded every detail, her hands trembling slightly as she traced the lines. The glyphs appeared to tell a story, not of gods or kings, but of a pact, a binding contract sealed in shadow and blood to imprison an entity known only as the Watcher. The Watcher was described as a presence without form, a darkness that devoured light and memory, imprisoned beneath the earth by a group of ancients whose names had been lost to time. The inscriptions warned that if the bindings were broken, the Watcher would awaken and bring ruin not only to the temple but to the entire world above. As the team prepared to descend into the lower chambers, Marin felt a growing sense of unease. The temple was not merely a relic, it was a warning, a place of power and danger that humans were never meant to disturb. The secrets it held were not only buried beneath stone, but protected by something older than memory. That night, as the mountain winds howled outside their camp, Marin dreamt of shadowy figures moving beneath the temple's stones, whispering in voices that were not voices, calling her name with a sound like the rustling of dry leaves. She awoke to the sensation of being watched, her tent flap trembling though the night was still. Morning came, and with it, a new resolve. The descent into the temple's depths would begin. What lay below might rewrite everything they thought they knew about history, belief, and the fragile boundary between the known and the unknown. The stone steps beneath the loose wall panel spiraled downward in a tight, seemingly endless coil, carved from the same dark basalt as the temple itself. Marin led the small team, their flashlight beams flickering across the rough surfaces, illuminating the glyphs that adorned the walls at irregular intervals. The air grew cooler with each step, carrying a faint metallic scent that lingered like a warning. The sound of their footsteps echoed softly, swallowed quickly by the heavy silence that seemed to press in from all sides. The deeper they went, the heavier the atmosphere became. It was not just the physical weight of the stone overhead, but something more intangible, a presence that seemed to grow with every downward turn. Marin's fingers traced the glyphs as she passed, reading and rereading the cryptic patterns. The inscriptions spoke of bindings and wards, ancient seals meant to imprison a force that defied human understanding. The Watcher was never described in physical terms. It was a void, an absence, a consuming shadow that eroded both space and memory. At the bottom of the staircase, they entered a narrow corridor, barely wide enough for a person to pass. The walls were smooth here, the carvings replaced by a strange, black substance that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. Marin instinctively reached out, her hand hovering just above the surface. The texture was unlike any stone she had ever touched, soft, almost alive, and cold enough to steal the warmth from her skin. The corridor opened into a vast chamber, lit by an eerie, diffused glow that seemed to emanate from nowhere. The air was thick and still, carrying a silence so complete it was almost deafening. In the center of the chamber lay a massive stone altar, covered in dust, but unmistakably the focal point of the room. Around it, the walls were carved with scenes that made Marin's blood run cold, figures consumed by darkness, eyes wide with terror, hands reaching out toward an unseen force. As the team moved cautiously forward, Marin's flashlight caught on something half buried in the dirt near the altar, a fragment of parchment, brittle and yellowed with age. She picked it up carefully, unfolding it to reveal lines of script written in a hand both elegant and hurried. The words were a prayer, a plea for mercy to a power that was no longer present, but whose shadow still loomed. The final line was a warning. Should the Watcher stir, let none gaze upon the light. A sudden draft swept through the chamber, extinguishing their flashlights and plunging them into darkness. The team froze, hearts pounding. For a moment, only the sound of heavy breathing filled the space. Then, faintly, a low hum began to rise from the walls, themselves a vibration felt more than heard, resonating deep within their chests. Marin's mind raced. Was it a natural phenomenon, a trick of the geology, or something far older, something awakened by their intrusion? She felt the weight of unseen eyes upon them, the palpable sense of a boundary crossed. "Stay close," she whispered, reaching for her lighter to relight their path. The small flame flickered weakly, casting long, trembling shadows that danced across the carvings. The hum persisted, growing louder, until it felt as if the very stone was alive and breathing. Then, from the far end of the chamber, a faint glimmer appeared, a pinprick of blue light that pulsed rhythmically like a heartbeat. The team watched in silence, mesmerized and terrified as the light grew, spreading tendrils of illumination along the walls, revealing more carvings hidden in the darkness. Marin stepped forward, compelled by an inexplicable force. She reached out toward the light, and as her fingers brushed the air, the chamber seemed to shudder. The altar cracked, thin lines, spider webbing across its surface, glowing with the same blue hue. The humming reached a crescendo, and then abruptly stopped. The chamber fell silent once more, the blue light fading until only the faintest trace remained. The team exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier resolve shaken. They knew they had disturbed something ancient and powerful, something that should have remained buried beneath the mountain's heart. The silence after the chamber's blue light faded was not a relief, it was a suffocating pause, as if the temple itself was holding its breath, waiting. Marin felt the weight of the moment pressing down, a fragile threshold crossed from which there was no easy return. The team gathered their equipment in strained silence, aware that every movement disturbed something unseen, something ancient that watched with patient menace. As they ascended the narrow stairwell back toward the temple floor, the oppressive atmosphere lessened only slightly. The glyphs on the walls no longer glowed, but the memory of their cryptic meaning lingered, haunting Marin's thoughts. The Watcher was no mere myth, it was a presence that had shaped the temple's purpose and defined the fate of those who built it. Outside, the mountain air was sharp and cold, a balm to their frayed nerves. The forest seemed indifferent to their intrusion, its thick canopy whispering secrets carried on the wind. But Marin could not shake the feeling that the temple's shadows had followed them upward, that some part of the darkness still clung to their skin. The following day, the team focused on gathering more data, using non-invasive methods to map the vast network of tunnels and chambers beneath the temple. Their instruments revealed a labyrinth of corridors, stretching far beyond their initial discovery, underground city carved from stone, with chambers that defied natural explanation. Some halls were lined with polished black stone that absorbed light, others with walls etched in ever-shifting glyphs that seemed to rearrange when unobserved. One section of the labyrinth was sealed by a massive stone door, its surface covered with the same glowing blue symbols seen in the lower chamber. Attempts to open it mechanically were futile. The door seemed to resist, humming faintly with an energy that sent tremors through the ground. Marin theorized that it was a barrier, a final seal designed to contain whatever the Watcher truly was. Late that night, Marin sat alone by the campfire, staring into the flickering flames as the wind carried the scent of pine and cold stone. She thought of the fragment of parchment, of the prayer that warned, should the Watcher stir, let none gaze upon the light. The blue glow, the humming, the trembling alter all signs that their presence had disturbed a fragile balance. As she pondered the implications, a sudden movement caught her eye. At the edge of the clearing, just beyond the firelight, shadows shifted unnaturally. a figure stepped forward, tall and cloaked in darkness, its face hidden beneath a hood woven from the night itself. Marin's breath caught, but before she could call out, the figure vanished like smoke in the wind. The encounter left her shaken. Was it a hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion? Or something more real, an emissary of the Watcher, or a guardian of the temple's secrets? She could not say. But the feeling of being watched had grown impossible to ignore. In the days that followed, Marin's dreams were filled with visions of the temple's underground city, a vast realm of shadows and stones, inhabited by beings both terrifying and incomprehensible. She saw endless corridors stretching into blackness, endless eyes blinking in the dark, and the Watcher itself, an abyssal void that swallowed light and hope alike. Each morning, she awoke with a growing sense of urgency, as though the boundaries between her dreams and reality were thinning. She began to question how much longer the temple's seals could hold, and whether her discovery had set in motion events beyond her control. One evening, as a storm rolled over the mountains, the team gathered in the main hall to review their findings. The mood was tense. Whispers of fear and doubt spread among the members. The lead geophysicist reported anomalous energy readings increasing steadily near the sealed door. Electronic devices had begun to fail unpredictably, their instruments acting as though overwhelmed by an unknown force. Marin stood and addressed the group. "We have two choices," she said quietly. "We either respect the temple's warnings and leave it sealed, or we push forward, risking everything to uncover the truth beneath the stone." The debate was fierce. Some argued that their duty as scientists was to reveal the unknown, no matter the cost. Others warned that some mysteries were best left untouched, that the temple's ancient builders had good reason to hide what lay beneath. In the end, the decision was made to proceed cautiously, to attempt to communicate with whatever force maintained the seal, hoping to find a way to contain it without breaking the barriers. As they prepared for their next descent, Marin could not shake the feeling that the Watcher was watching, waiting for the moment when the temple's secrets would be fully unearthed and when the darkness would finally be free. The team prepared for their next descent with a mix of solemnity and unease. Equipment was checked and rechecked. Specialized sensors designed to measure electromagnetic fluctuations were calibrated to their highest sensitivity. Marin led the group back through the labyrinthine halls, the air growing colder and heavier with every step downward. The blue-tinged glyphs lining the walls seemed to pulse faintly, a subtle but unmistakable heartbeat embedded in stone. At the massive sealed door, the team deployed their instruments, attempting to decode its complex symbols and understand the nature of the barrier. It became clear that the door was not simply a physical blockade, but a sophisticated mechanism of binding, combining ancient craftsmanship with energies unknown to modern science. The symbols shifted slowly beneath their gaze, as though alive, and the humming vibration intensified. Marin felt a strange kinship with the glyphs, if they held a message meant for her alone. The fragments of the ancient language she had painstakingly pieced together suggested a ritual, a code that, if recited or performed, could either reinforce the seal or unravel it entirely. The choice was terrifyingly clear: to probe, to deeply risked unleashing the Watcher. Yet retreating meant leaving the temple's mystery unsolved. That night, the camp was restless. Marin's dreams were invaded by visions of shadowy figures moving in the dark halls, whispering her name in voices that echoed like distant thunder. She awoke, gasping, a cold sweat soaking her clothes. Her mind was filled with images of the Watcher's abyssal form of void, so complete it devoured everything, even thought itself. The following day, as they prepared to attempt the ritual decoding, strange occurrences unsettled the team. Equipment malfunctioned inexplicably, compasses spun wildly, and radios emitted static and eerie, unintelligible sounds. Several team members reported feeling watched or glimpsing figures at the edge of their vision that vanished when looked at directly. The air grew thick with tension, and Marin wondered if the Watcher's influence was already seeping beyond the temple's stone walls. During the ritual attempts, the glyphs on the door began to glow brighter, casting flickering blue light that illuminated the chamber in an otherworldly glow. The humming reached a crescendo, resonating through the temple's very foundations. Suddenly, a crack spiderwebbed across the door's surface, the glowing lines splitting and widening. A cold wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing their torches and plunging them into darkness. Panic surged among the team. Shouts echoed, footsteps scattered, and in the confusion, Marin heard a whisper carried on the wind, "The seal breaks." Moments later, the lights returned, revealing that the crack had begun to widen. A dark fissure spreading down the door's length. Marin's heart pounded. The Watcher was stirring, and the temple's ancient bindings were failing. The team quickly withdrew, sealing the door once more with hastily erected barriers, but the damage was done. The sense of dread deepened, and the mountain seemed to groan as if in pain. Outside, the storm they had anticipated broke, rain pelting down with relentless force and thunder shaking the earth. Marin knew that their presence had set forces into motion that could not be stopped by simple barriers or prayers. The Watcher's awakening was inevitable, and she feared the world above was unprepared for the darkness looming beneath their feet. The storm's fury battered the mountainside, rain turning the forest floor to mud and sending torrents rushing down the narrow trails. Inside the base camp, the team gathered in the dim glow of emergency lamps, their faces pale and drawn. The crack in the ancient door haunted every whispered conversation, an ominous reminder that the boundaries between their world and something far darker had begun to unravel. Marin sat apart from the others, staring into the flickering flames of a small fire pit. Her mind replayed the last moments in the chamber, the hum growing louder until it threatened to shatter her thoughts. The sudden crack ripping through the stone, and the cold breath of something unseen brushing past her skin. She wondered if the Watcher had been truly bound all these centuries, or merely held at bay by fragile human will. In the days that followed, subtle changes began to ripple through the surrounding region. Animals fled the forests, their calls silenced by some invisible terror. Streams ran dark, their waters thick with sediment and something unplaceable, as if the land itself were mourning. Villagers in distant towns reported strange lights flickering on the mountaintop, and some spoke in fearful whispers of shadows moving against the storm. Back at the temple, the team dared not return to the sealed door. Their instruments showed unstable readings, energies fluctuating beyond comprehension, as if the fabric of reality itself was thinning. Marin's dreams grew darker still, filled with the Watcher's abyssal gaze and voices calling from below, promising release and oblivion. One morning, Marin awoke to find the scrap of parchment, the same fragment bearing the prayer against the Watcher, placed on her bedside table. The spiral glyph at its center glowed faintly, an unspoken message that the boundary was weakening further. With heavy heart, she knew what had to be done. The temple's secrets were no longer contained. The Watcher was stirring, and its influence was spreading. The thin veil between worlds was tearing, and whatever lay beneath would soon be free to reach beyond its stone prison. As she prepared to leave the mountain, Moran glanced back once more at the temple, its dark silhouette etched against the stormy sky. The ancient stones whispered, a final warning carried on the wind. Do not wake what sleeps. The mountains swallowed the temple in shadow, and the watcher waited, patient, eternal, and hungry for the world above. In the heart of a vast desert, where shifting sands swallowed entire cities and the sky burned with relentless heat, there stood a temple unlike any other. It was a structure of sun-baked stone and weathered grandeur, its silhouette jagged against the horizon, half buried by centuries of drifting dunes. The locals spoke of it in hushed tones, calling it the Temple of Whispers, a place both revered and feared, where the desert wind seemed to carry secrets from another age. The temple's origin was shrouded in mystery. No known civilization claimed its construction, and no surviving texts offered a clear explanation of its purpose. Its walls bore intricate carvings of serpents entwined with stars, figures with elongated limbs reaching toward the sky, and glyphs that seemed to shimmer faintly in the searing sunlight. Many of these carvings were unlike any language scholars had encountered, composed of symbols that shifted subtly when viewed from different angles, as if the stone itself breathed and changed. When Dr. Kiran Malhotra and her team arrived, their goal was to uncover the truth behind the temple's enigmatic past. Equipped with cutting-edge technology and driven by relentless curiosity, they sought to document every inch of the structure before the desert reclaimed it once more. Yet, from the very first step onto the sun-scorched grounds, Kiran felt an unsettling presence, subtle but persistent sensation that the temple watched her, its secrets guarding themselves against discovery. Their initial survey revealed evidence of complex rituals performed within the temple's chambers. Scattered fragments of pottery, charred remains of offerings, and faded frescoes depicted ceremonies that involved fire and shadow, light and darkness, intertwined in ways that suggested a profound understanding of forces beyond the tangible world. The temple was not merely a place of worship, it was a threshold, a conduit between the seen and the unseen. As the sun dipped below the endless dunes, casting long shadows across the temple's face, the team discovered a hidden entrance, a narrow passage concealed behind a collapsed wall. The air that seeped from the opening was cool and dry, carrying the faint scent of ancient incense and something metallic, like the scent of forgotten blood. Inside, a spiral staircase carved into the sandstone descended into the depths below. The walls of the passage were inscribed with symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the dying light, their meaning elusive yet hauntingly familiar. Kiran traced her fingers along the carvings, feeling a subtle vibration beneath her touch, as if the temple itself whispered warnings meant only for the initiated. The inscriptions spoke of a guardian, a force bound by ancient rites to protect a secret too terrible to face. With each step down the spiral, the temperature dropped, and the silence deepened into a profound stillness. At the bottom, the passage opened into a vast cavern, its ceiling lost in shadow. In the center stood a monolithic altar of black stone, etched with patterns that pulsed softly with an inner light. Around the altar, the floor was littered with the bones of animals and, disturbingly, fragments of what appeared to be ancient tools and weapons. Kiran's heart quickened as she realized the significance of the discovery. This was no ordinary temple. It was a tomb, a prison, a sanctuary designed to contain something far older than the desert sands. As she stepped closer to the altar, a chill ran down her spine. The air seemed charged with an energy both magnetic and repellent, a presence lurking just beyond perception. She awoke with a start, the taste of dust and iron on her tongue, and the unmistakable feeling that the temple's secret was awakening. The next day would mark the beginning of their descent into the darkness. A journey into the heart of the temple's hidden terrors, a journey from which there might be no return. The morning sun rose over the endless desert, casting a harsh light on the temple's weathered stones and the faces of the team gathered at its entrance. Dr. Kiran Malhotra moved with purpose, her eyes scanning the horizon even as her mind raced with questions that had no easy answers. The shadowed cavern they had uncovered the night before was both a promise and a warning. Threshold into a world forgotten by time and swallowed by silence. The descent into the temple's depths was a slow, deliberate process. The spiral staircase was narrow and treacherous, carved with symbols that seemed to shift subtly beneath the flickering light of their headlamps. The walls, smooth and worn, bore the faintest traces of handprints marks left by those who had come before, or perhaps by those who had been forced to stay. At the bottom of the staircase, the cavern opened into a vast chamber that defied description. The ceiling stretched high above, swallowed by shadows that flickered with the faint glow of phosphorescent minerals embedded in the rock. The monolithic altar stood at the center, its surface etched with intricate patterns that pulsed with an otherworldly light. Around it, the bones of animals and shards of ancient tools lay scattered, silent witnesses to rites performed long ago. Kiran felt the weight of the place settle on her shoulders. This was no mere archaeological site. It was a sanctum of power, a prison built to hold something terrible in check. As she approached the altar, the patterns seemed to shift and move, the lines flowing like liquid stone. Her fingers hovered just above the surface, hesitant to touch what might break the fragile balance. The team set up their instruments, scanning the chamber for traces of energy and life. Their readings were baffling, fluctuating magnetic fields, inexplicable temperature shifts, and an overwhelming sense of presence that defied scientific explanation. Electronic devices malfunctioned, their displays flickering and dying as if drained by an unseen force. As they recorded their findings, Kiran's gaze fell on a fragment of parchment partially buried beneath the altar. Carefully, she unearthed it, revealing faded script written in a language lost to history. The words were a prayer, or perhaps a warning and invocation to a guardian spirit bound within the stone, tasked with protecting the secret hidden below. That night, as the desert wind rattled their tents and the stars blinked coldly overhead, Kiran's dreams were invaded by visions. She saw the temple as it might have been millennia ago, a place of sacrifice and worship, where shadowed figures chanted beneath flickering torchlight. She saw the guardian, a shape made of shifting darkness and light, bound by chains of stone and oath. And she heard a whisper, soft and insistent, "Do not awaken what sleeps." She awoke with a start, the echo of the whisper lingering in her mind. The desert was silent outside, but within her heart a storm was gathering. The secrets beneath the temple were stirring, and the path ahead was darker than any she had yet imagined. The cavern-esque silence, after the night's visions, weighed heavily on Kiran-esque's mind. As dawn broke over the desert horizon, the heat outside promised to be relentless, but deep beneath the temple, the air remained cold and still, almost oppressively so. As she prepared for another descent, the team moved with a measured urgency, fully aware that the temple was no ordinary archaeological site. It was a threshold to a world where ancient forces had been imprisoned for untold millennia. The steps down spiraled into darkness, the walls etched with glyphs that seemed to pulse faintly, glowing blue in the weak light of their lamps. Each symbol shifted subtly, as though alive, a language not meant for human eyes, woven into the very fabric of the stone. Kieran felt a growing unease. The glyphs were warnings, seals, and prayers, all at once, meant to bind a presence far older and more dangerous than humanity could comprehend. When they reached the chamber again, the altar's intricate patterns shimmered softly, their light ebbing and flowing like a heartbeat. The bones scattered around it told a grim tale, sacrifices offered to keep the entity beneath restrained. Kieran's fingers brushed over the carvings, tracing the flow of lines that suggested motion, struggle, and containment. The Watcher, a name whispered by the locals but never spoken openly, was said to be a void, a darkness that consumed not only light but memory and will. The team deployed their most sensitive instruments, hoping to glean scientific data that might explain the temple's mysteries. Instead, their devices faltered, compasses spun wildly, magnetic fields fluctuated inexplicably, and their electronic logs showed gaps as if corrupted by an unseen force. As Kieran catalogued these anomalies, the atmosphere grew heavy with tension. Voices echoed faintly, distant and unintelligible, as if carried on the stale air of the cavern. Shadows flickered at the edge of vision, disappearing whenever directly looked at. The sense of being watched became palpable, pressing in on the team with a suffocating weight. Suddenly, the altar emitted a low hum, barely perceptible, but steadily growing in intensity. The carvings glowed brighter, casting ghostly blue light that revealed new patterns etched in the dust. The fissure in the stone that had appeared days before widened subtly, the glowing lines spreading like veins filled with frozen fire. Panic rippled through the team as the chamber trembled, loose stones falling from the ceiling. The boundary between their world and the darkness beneath thinned dangerously. Kieran's mind raced. They had disturbed the seal, and the Watcher was beginning to awaken. The glow pulsed in response, the hum fluctuating as if the entity listened. For a moment, the fissure paused, its widening, the air stilling as if caught in a breath. But the reprieve was brief. The fissure deepened, and the blue light spilled out in waves, illuminating grotesque figures carved into the chamber walls, ancient guardians twisted in agony, frozen between stone and spirit. A cold wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing their lights and plunging them into darkness. In the blackness, Kieran felt the presence close, overwhelming and infinite. The Watcher was no longer just a name or a myth. It was a force, hungry and patient, ready to cross the threshold. When light returned, the team was shaken but alive. They retreated hastily, sealing the chamber as best they could. Outside, the desert wind howled, carrying with it the scent of dust and something unnameable, the stirring of a secret long buried but never truly dormant. Kieran knew their discovery had unleashed a force beyond understanding, and the world above was ill-prepared for the darkness now stirring beneath the sands. The days after their harrowing retreat from the cavern were heavy with a silence that pressed upon the team like a physical weight. The desert outside remained relentless in its heat, but beneath the temple, the sense of foreboding had deepened into something palpable. A tension woven into the very stones, as if the Watcher's stirring presence had seeped beyond the chamber's confines. Dr. Kiran Malhotra sat by the fading campfire, staring into the flames, as if seeking answers in their unpredictable dance. Some wished to leave immediately, fearing that their intrusion had awakened a force they could neither comprehend nor contain. Others were determined to press on, driven by the irresistible lure of the unknown. The temple itself seemed to respond to their hesitation. At night, faint blue glows flickered from the fissure in the sealed chamber, casting eerie light on the temple walls. Electronic instruments began to fail unpredictably, their displays flickering with static or blanking out entirely. And in the shadowed corners of their camp, team members whispered of strange noises, distant chants, the rustle of unseen robes, and the occasional glimpse of movement at the edge of vision. Marin, the geophysicist, recorded energy spikes emanating from beneath the temple, irregular but intensifying with each passing hour. The magnetic fields twisted and surged in patterns that defied natural explanation, suggesting a force that was not only ancient but active and aware. In the dim glow of dawn, she found strange symbols etched into the fabric of her sleeping bag, glyphs that matched those beneath the temple, but formed into a spiral she had never seen before. The team convened, and the mood was grim. It was clear that whatever lay beneath the temple was reaching outward, breaking through barriers meant to hold it at bay. The ancient prayers and seals might not be enough. Determined to understand, Kiran led an expedition back to the sealed chamber, armed not only with scientific instruments, but with ancient texts and ritual implements she had hastily gathered from distant archives. She hoped to perform a ceremony, one that might reinforce the bindings and stave off the darkness. The descent was tense and silent. The narrow stairs seemed to close around them, the shifting glyphs on the walls pulsing faintly in rhythm with the team's quickening heartbeats. At the chamber, the fissure had grown wider, jagged lines of blue flame licking the edges of the stone door. Kiran began the ritual, chanting words long forgotten, her voice echoing against the stone as the team watched in tense silence. The chamber responded. The glowing glyphs flared brightly, the air shimmered, and the humming intensified to a deafening roar. Suddenly, the fissure cracked open further, and from the darkness beyond, a cold wind rushed out, extinguishing their torches and plunging them into abyssal blackness. A deep, resonant voice filled the chamber, not spoken but felt, ancient and terrible. "You have awakened me," it intoned, "and the Watcher will no longer wait." Panic surged, and the team scrambled to relight their torches. But the light was dim and flickering, barely penetrating the growing shadows. Shapes moved just beyond the edge of sight, formless yet alive. The chamber trembled, stones falling, and the walls seemed to bend and pulse like the living heart of some monstrous creature. The ritual's final words left her lips just as a brilliant flash of light erupted from the altar, banishing the shadows and sealing the fissure. For now, the temple's dark secret remained alive beneath the desert sands, waiting for the day it would break free again. The desert wind carried a chill that night, unseasonal and sharp, as if the earth itself were whispering warnings. The temple's silhouette loomed against the star-studded sky, an ancient sentinel guarding secrets better left untouched. Dr. Kiran Malhotra sat alone by the dying embers of the campfire, her thoughts heavy with the knowledge that the Watcher's presence was no longer confined. In the days that followed their harrowing ritual, strange phenomena continued to plague the region. Animals fled the desert en masse, their tracks disappearing into the shifting sands. The water in nearby oases became bitter and foul, and an unnatural silence settled over the once vibrant landscape. Villagers from distant settlements spoke in fearful tones of strange lights flickering near the mountain range and shadows moving beneath the sand. Back at the temple, the team packed their equipment in somber silence, each member grappling with the weight of what they had uncovered. The seals they had attempted to reinforce might have held for now, but the fissures in the temple's foundation suggested a fragile piece. The Watcher, bound but restless, was a force beyond comprehension, patient, eternal, and hungry for release. Kieran lingered one last time at the temple's entrance, her gaze tracing the intricate carvings that adorned its walls. Each symbol told a story of sacrifice, vigilance, and a desperate hope that the ancient binding would endure. Yet she knew that time was a cruel adversary. The desert sands would shift, the stones would crumble, and eventually the seals would fail. As dawn broke, casting a golden light over the barren landscape, Kieran made a silent vow. The Watcher's secret was now hers to bear, a burden that transcended science, faith, and reason. She would dedicate her life to understanding the temple's mysteries, to preparing the world for the darkness that stirred beneath. The temple faded into the horizon as they departed, its dark shadow swallowed once more by the desert. But the wind carried a lingering echo, a warning in a language older than memory. Do not awaken what sleeps beneath the sands. And beneath the shifting dunes, the Watcher waited, patient, eternal, and poised to reclaim the world once more. Deep within the dense jungles of Southeast Asia, where sunlight barely pierced the thick canopy and the air hung heavy with humidity, there stood a temple lost to time. Covered in creeping vines and moss, its ancient stones were cracked and worn, yet still bore the unmistakable mark of a civilization long vanished. The locals called it the Temple of Silent Echoes, for the forest around it was eerily still, as if nature itself feared to disturb what lay within. The temple was a marvel of architecture, towering spires, carved with images of celestial beings and serpentine creatures, stairways that seemed to climb endlessly into the thick foliage, and chambers filled with statues whose eyes seemed to follow every movement. Yet beneath its beauty lurked a darkness, a secret that had been carefully hidden for centuries. Dr. Elena Ruiz, a renowned archaeologist specializing in ancient cultures, arrived with her team determined to uncover the temple's mysteries. Armed with the latest technology and guided by local legends, they set out to explore the sprawling complex. From the outset, Elena felt an unsettling presence, weight that pressed on her chest and whispered warnings she could not ignore. Initial surveys revealed a complex network of tunnels and chambers beneath the temple's foundations. Their instruments detected anomalous areas where the Earth's magnetic fields twisted unpredictably, where temperature readings fluctuated without explanation. Strange symbols adorned the walls, unlike any known script, a language that seemed alive and ever-changing. As the team ventured deeper, they uncovered evidence of rituals involving fire and blood. Sacrifices meant not just for gods, but for entities beyond human understanding. The temple was a gateway, a place where the veil between worlds was thin and fragile. One afternoon, while exploring a hidden chamber, Elena discovered a set of intricately carved tablets, their surfaces covered in glyphs that pulsed with a faint inner light. The tablets spoke of a guardian spirit bound beneath the temple of force that protected the sacred site, but demanded a terrible price. That night, Alina dreamt of shadowy figures moving silently through the jungle, of voices chanting in a language she could not comprehend. She awoke to find strange markings etched into her notebook, symbols she had never seen but felt compelled to trace. The next day, as the team prepared to descend into the temple's deepest chambers, the forest around them grew unnaturally quiet. The birds ceased their songs, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Alina knew they were on the brink of uncovering a secret that had remained hidden for centuries, a secret that could change everything they thought they knew about the temple, its builders, and the dark forces it contained. The thick canopy of the jungle above seemed to close tighter as Dr. Alina Ruiz and her team descended further into the temple's labyrinthine underbelly. The air grew cooler and heavier, saturated with a dampness that clung to skin and breathed of ancient earth long undisturbed. Their footsteps echoed softly against stone walls, carved with mysterious glyphs that glowed faintly, as if alive with an unseen energy. Each chamber revealed new layers of enigma. Walls bore intricate carvings of celestial battles, serpentine deities entwined in eternal struggle, and shadowed figures bound by chains of light. The symbolism was alien, yet hauntingly familiar, a language of power, sacrifice, and containment. Alina studied each detail with a growing sense of unease. The deeper they delved, the more the temple seemed less a monument of worship and more a prison built to hold a force beyond mortal reckoning. Their instruments detected fluctuations, magnetic anomalies, bursts of cold air, and faint, rhythmic pulses of energy emanating from the temple's core. Electronic devices faltered unpredictably. Compasses spun without direction. Cameras flickered and failed. The temple resisted their efforts to record and understand, as though it had a will of its own. One night, as the team camped within a cavernous chamber lined with towering statues, whose faces bore expressions of agony and vigilance, Alina dreamt vividly. She wandered through the temple as it once was, a place alive with ritual fire and chanting voices, where shadowed figures called out to ancient gods. In her vision, a great shadow stirred beneath the temple, a formless presence, hungry and watchful, bound by chains of light, but restless. She awoke, gasping, the echo of whispered voices fading into the damp silence. In the dim glow of dawn, she found strange markings on her arm, symbols glowing faintly beneath her skin, a manifestation of the temple's awakening. The following day, as they approached the deepest chamber, a sudden tremor shook the ground. Loose stones fell from the ceiling, and an eerie, low hum filled the air, growing steadily into a resonant roar that vibrated through bone and stone alike. The team hurried forward, guided by the flickering light of phosphorescent minerals embedded in the walls. At the chamber's center stood a massive altar, its surface carved with the temple's most complex glyphs, pulsating with an inner blue flame. Around it, the floor was littered with the remains of ancient sacrifices, bones, and shattered relics, a testament to the terrible price paid to keep the guardian contained. Alina's voice trembled as she read aloud the inscriptions, warnings and prayers to a being known only as the Silent Watcher, a force said to consume light and silence the voices of the living. The temple's rituals had been designed not to worship, but to bind. The chamber's humming intensified, the altar's glow brightening until it bathed the room in an ethereal light. Shadows writhed at the edges of vision, twisting and shaping into forms both terrifying and sorrowful. The team's instruments went dark, their electronic readings lost to an overwhelming force beyond comprehension. Alina felt a presence press against her mind, a dark whisper promising oblivion and release. She clutched the ancient tablets tightly, reciting fragmented prayers that had been passed down through generations of temple guardians. For a moment, the shadows recoiled, the glow dimmed, and the temple's oppressive weight lifted slightly, but the reprieve was brief. The altar cracked, a spiderweb fissure spreading across its surface, and the chamber trembled once more. The Watcher was awakening. The chamber trembled beneath their feet, a deep rumble that resonated like the heartbeat of some ancient, slumbering beast. Dr. Alina Ruiz felt the air thicken, charged with an electric tension that pressed against her chest and clouded her thoughts. The fissures, snaking across the altar's surface, pulsed with a cold blue light, the glow intensifying as if fueled by the awakening of the Watcher itself. Around the chamber, the statues carved into the walls seemed to shift subtly, their stone eyes gleaming with newfound life. Shadows lengthened and twisted, coalescing into shapes both grotesque and majestic. Ancient guardians caught between flesh and stone, bound by curses and oaths centuries old. Their silent vigilance was broken now. A warning and a lament echoed in the trembling stone. The team scrambled to salvage what data they could, but their instruments failed, one after another, succumbing to the overwhelming presence that filled the chamber. Cameras stuttered and died, sensors flickered, and the steady hum of electronic devices was drowned beneath a rising tide of dark energy. Elena's mind struggled against the tide of dread that threatened to consume her. The ancient tablets in her hands seemed to pulse with a life of their own, their inscriptions burning faintly beneath her fingertips. She recited the prayers once more, her voice steady despite the growing fear that gripped her. Each word was a fragile thread holding back the darkness, a desperate plea to forces she barely understood. From the fissure in the altar, a cold wind issued forth, swirling through the chamber like a living thing. It carried whispers words in a language lost to time, heavy with promise and threat. The shadows at the edges of their vision moved closer, shaping into forms both human and otherworldly. Faces flickered in the darkness, ancient priests, cursed souls, and the Watcher itself, a void of endless hunger and silent malice. Kiran reached out instinctively, her fingers brushing the altar's cracked surface. She saw the costs, the lives lost, the prayers whispered in desperation, and the fragile chains of light that now threatened to break. The chamber shook violently, dust raining from the ceiling, and the fissure widened further. The blue light spilled forth like liquid fire, washing over the team in waves. Alina felt herself pulled toward the abyss beyond the altar, a force compelling her to step into the void and become one with the Watcher's endless hunger. Summoning every ounce of will, she gripped the tablets tighter, chanting the final lines of the ancient ritual. The words echoed through the chamber, resonating with the temple's stone and shaking the very foundations of the mountain. The blue light faltered, dimmed, and then collapsed inward, sealing the fissure and pushing back the shadows. Breathless and trembling, the team collapsed, the oppressive weight lifting as the temple returned to uneasy silence. But Alina knew this was only a reprieve. The Watcher had been stirred, its chains weakened, and the price of awakening would be paid in blood and shadow. As they ascended from the depths, the jungle outside was eerily silent, the usual cacophony of life stilled as if nature itself held its breath. The temple stood as a monument to ancient power and fragile hope, dark, secret, buried beneath stone and vine. The oppressive silence that greeted the team outside the temple was unlike anything they had ever experienced in the jungle. The usual chorus of cicadas, birds, and unseen insects had vanished, replaced by a void of sound so complete it pressed against their ears and made the air feel thick and suffocating. Dr. Alina Ruiz paused at the temple's entrance, her eyes scanning the dense canopy above, searching for signs of life or movement. There was nothing but stillness and unnatural quiet that set every nerve on edge. The jungle, which had once seemed vibrant and teeming with life, now felt like a tomb. The temperature had dropped unexpectedly, a cold that seeped into their bones despite the humid air. The team gathered their gear in tense silence, each member acutely aware that their disturbance of the temple's sacred bindings had awakened something ancient and malevolent. As they made their way back through the winding trails, Elena's thoughts churned with worry. Its presence was leaking through the cracks in reality, spreading shadows that warped the world around them. She wondered how far its influence extended if the forest itself was infected by its dark essence. Back at their base camp, strange phenomena continued to unfold. Electronic devices failed unpredictably, their screens flickering with static or going completely dark. Radios emitted bursts of unintelligible noise, punctuated by faint whispers in the same ancient language inscribed on the temple walls. Several team members reported vivid nightmares, waking with bruises and scratches they could not explain. A creeping sense of paranoia gripped them all, shadows seeming to move just beyond the flickering light of their campfires. One evening, Alina was awakened by a soft tapping at her tent flap. Heart pounding, she unzipped the flap cautiously, only to find the forest outside bathed in an unnatural blue glow. The source was the temple, its silhouette etched against the night sky. The fissure in the altar pulsing with the same eerie light. A low hum vibrated through the era sound that seemed to reach into her mind, calling, tempting. Despite warnings from her team, Alina felt an irresistible pullback toward the temple. She knew that the Watcher's awakening was not a simple event, but a slow, creeping infectiona force that would grow stronger with time if left unchecked. She began to research ancient texts and folklore, piecing together fragments of knowledge from distant cultures that spoke of similar entities bound beneath sacred sites around the world. Her investigations revealed a terrifying pattern. Temples like this one had been built not only as places of worship, but as prisons for entities that threatened to unravel reality itself. These guardians were bound by powerful rituals, but their chains were fragile, worn thin by time and human interference. Alina realized that the temple was just one of many such prisons scattered across the globe. The consequences of these ancient bindings weakening could be catastrophic, not just locally, but on a global scale. As the jungle around them seemed to darken and the air grew heavier, Alina resolved to return to the temple one last time. This time, armed not only with science, but with ancient rites and protective charms, she would attempt to reinforce the seals or risk unleashing a darkness that could consume the world. The jungle had grown darker, the canopy closing in like a shroud, as Dr. Elena Ruiz and her team approached the temple once more. A storm was gathering on the horizon, thunder rolling through the distant mountains like the growl of some ancient beast awakened. The air was thick with anticipation, heavy and electric, as if the world itself braced for what was to come. Inside the temple, The atmosphere was charged with a malevolent energy that pressed against the skin like a physical force. The fissure in the altar's surface had widened, glowing with an unholy blue light that cast twisted shadows across the stone walls. The carvings on the walls seemed to writhe and shift, revealing new patterns and symbols that spoke of sacrifice, binding, and eternal vigilance. Alina carried the ancient tablets close, their glyphs pulsing faintly, guiding her steps as she led the team into the heart of the temple. The shadows moved at the edges of their vision, coalescing into shapes both familiar and horrifying, specters of past guardians, victims of the Watcher's hunger, and the Watcher itself, an endless void that consumed light and memory alike. The team set up their protective wards, ancient charms interwoven with modern technology, in a desperate attempt to hold back the encroaching darkness. Alina began the ritual, her voice steady as she chanted words passed down through millennia, invoking powers both ancient and sacred. The temple responded, the walls humming with power as the fissure began to close, the blue light dimming to a faint glow. But the Watcher was not so easily contained, and a cold wind surged forth from the altar, extinguishing their lamps and plunging them into darkness. In that void, Alina felt the Watcher's presence, an overwhelming hunger, a silence so complete it drowned thought itself. Summoning every shred of will, she clutched the tablets and completed the incantation. A brilliant light erupted from the altar, washing away the darkness and sealing the fissure once more. The shadows retreated, leaving behind a silence that was profound and final. Exhausted but resolute, the team ascended from the temple, the first light of dawn breaking over the jungle canopy. The Watcher was bound again, for now, but Alina knew that the ancient chains were fragile, and the temple's dark secret would not remain buried forever. As they emerged into the warmth of the rising sun, Alina cast one last glance back at the temple's weathered stones. The jungle seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next awakening, the next whisper of the Watcher's hunger beneath the earth. The dark secret hidden beneath the sacred temple remained a timeless warning etched in stone and shadow. Some forces are not meant to be disturbed, some darkness not meant to be unleashed. And beneath the jungle's green embrace, the Watcher waited, patient and eternal, for the day it would rise again. Nestled amid the mist-covered peaks of the Andean mountains, where the air was thin and the clouds drifted like ghosts among the ancient ruins, there stood a temple unlike any other, known to the local Quechua people as the House of Echoes. This sacred site was shrouded in legend and mystery. Its stone walls rose sharply from the rugged terrain, carved with symbols that seemed to pulse with a hidden rhythm-an ancient heartbeat that refused to be silenced by time. For centuries, villagers living in the shadow of the temple whispered tales of strange lights and eerie sounds emanating from its depths. Stories passed down through generations, like sacred prayers. They spoke of voices carried by the mountain winds, echoes of forgotten rituals, of sacrifices made to appease gods that no longer walked the earth. The temple was a place where the boundary between the mortal world and the realm of spirits was thin. Dr. Mateo Alvarez, a cultural anthropologist with a passion for ancient Andean civilizations, arrived at the site with a team of researchers determined to uncover the temple's secrets. Mateo had long been fascinated by the intersection of myth and history, and the House of Echoes promised insights that could reshape understanding of the region's spiritual heritage. The first days were spent carefully mapping the sprawling complex, The temple's design was intricate, with terraces carved into the mountainside, labyrinthine corridors, and chambers filled with stone idols whose eyes seemed to watch silently. The carvings told stories of celestial beings, fierce warriors, and serpents entwined in cosmic dance. But beneath the beauty lay something darker, symbols etched in hidden corners that bore warnings rather than blessings. The air grew cooler as they moved deeper, filled with the scent of earth and something metallic like dried blood. The walls here were covered in murals depicting shadowed figures engaged in rituals that blended light and darkness, sacrifice and redemption. The most chilling discovery was a chamber at the tunnel's end, dominated by a massive stone altar stained with crimson marks that refused to fade. Around it lay relics of unknown origin, twisted artifacts, broken bones, and faded parchments inscribed with a script that defied translation. Matteo sensed that this was no ordinary place of worship. It was a sanctuary built to contain a force beyond human understanding. That night, as the team camped near the temple entrance, Matteo was visited by dreams that blurred the line between reality and nightmare. He wandered through the temple as it had once been, alive with chanting priests and flickering torchlight, feeling the weight of unseen eyes watching from the shadows. He heard a voice calling a voice, both ancient and ageless, promising knowledge but demanding a price. He awoke with the taste of dust and iron in his mouth, the echo of the voice lingering in his mind. Outside, the mountain winds whispered secrets in a language older than stone, and Matteo knew their journey into the temple's dark heart was only beginning. Descending into the labyrinth beneath the House of Echoes, Dr. Matteo Alvarez and his team felt the oppressive weight of centuries pressing upon them. Their footsteps echoed in the narrow tunnels, swallowed quickly by darkness that seemed to absorb sound itself. The murals lining the walls told fragmented tales, scenes painted in ochre and charcoal that depicted shadowy figures locked in eternal struggle with formless shapes of darkness. These images were unlike anything Matteo had seen before, defying conventional interpretation. They spoke of beings not bound by mortal rules, entities that consumed light and twisted reality, held in check only by rituals as old as the mountains themselves. At intervals, the team paused to document glyphs carved into the stone. These symbols pulsed faintly with a spectral glow, reacting to their presence in ways that defied scientific explanation. Matteo traced his fingers along one particularly intricate design, a spiral intertwined with serpent-like motifs, and felt a sudden chill that raced down his spine. It was as though the temple itself was alive, watching and waiting. The deeper they ventured, the more unstable the atmosphere became. Instruments began to malfunction, their screens flickering erratically. Electronic devices picked up strange frequencies, low, droning hums punctuated by bursts of static and whispers in a language lost to time. At times, shadows seemed to move just beyond their field of vision, slipping away whenever anyone tried to focus. In one chamber, the team uncovered what appeared to be a ritual site, a circle of scorched stones surrounding a carved basin filled with dried crimson stains. Matteo noticed symbols etched deep into the stone floor, forming a pattern that seemed to shift subtly when viewed from different angles, like a living puzzle designed to trap both the eye and the mind. As night fell over the mountain, the temple seemed to come alive with subtle sounds, distant chants, the rustling of unseen robes, and the faint clang of metal on stone. The camp's usual sense of security faded, replaced by a growing unease that seeped into their bones. That night, Matteo dreamt of the temple's ancient past. He saw priests clad in flowing robes, their faces hidden beneath hoods, chanting in unison as flames danced in the darkness. The Watcher, a name whispered in the ancient scripts, was present. A shadowy force contained beneath the altar's stone, a hunger bound by blood and oath. The dream shifted, showing the Watchers awakening, fissures spreading across the altar, blue flames licking at the edges of the stone, and shadows pouring forth like liquid night. Voices cried out in terror and defiance, but the darkness consumed all, erasing memory and light. Matteo awoke with a start, heart pounding, the taste of iron heavy on his tongue. He found the ancient glyphs etched faintly on his palm, glowing with a cold light that pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. The temple's secret was no longer confined to stone. It had reached into him, drawing him deeper into its dark embrace. The following day, the team debated their next steps. Some urged caution, fearing that the temple's power was too great and unpredictable. Others, driven by curiosity and the thirst for discovery, argued that they must press on, unraveling the mysteries before the darkness could spread further. Matteo knew that the temple's secret was a double-edged sword. The knowledge they sought came with a price, one that had been paid by countless souls before them, lost to shadows that hunger and wait beneath sacred stone. The tension among the team was palpable as they gathered beneath the low-hanging canopy of the ancient Andean forest just outside the shadowed entrance to the deeper temple tunnels. The sun filtered through thick leaves, but the light felt dimmer here, subdued, as if the forest itself absorbed it, reluctant to illuminate what lay hidden. Dr. Matteo Alvarez paced slowly, his thoughts tangled with ancient lore and the chilling experiences of the past days. The weight of what they were about to face pressed down like the mountain air, thin, cold, and unforgiving. The decision to proceed deeper was not unanimous. Several members voiced concerns over the strange occurrences, the equipment failures, the cryptic markings on their skin, the creeping sense of dread that followed them like a specter. Yet, the drive to uncover truth, to shed light on the temple's secrets, was stronger. After all, what was knowledge but a flame to drive back darkness? But Matteo knew all too well that some flames could burn too fiercely, consuming everything in their path. Descending the narrow carved stairways, the temperature dropped sharply. The air tasted metallic and stale, heavy with the residue of ancient rituals and blood long dried but never forgotten. Faint blue phosphorescent minerals embedded in the stone walls cast a ghostly glow, revealing glyphs that writhed subtly in the dim light, a language alive with ancient power. The murals here told a grim story. Shadowy figures bound in chains of light, celestial serpents entwined with dark voids, and a towering entity known simply as the Watcher, an eternal sentinel imprisoned beneath the altar to guard the boundary between worlds. Its gaze was said to silence voices and erase memories, a force hungry for the light of life itself. Matteo felt the eyes of the stone guardians on them, their carved faces twisted in eternal vigilance, their silence a warning, disturb not the prison beneath. The temple's builders had sacrificed much to hold this entity at bay, lives, faith, and boundless hope that their chains would never break. Their instruments continued to falter. The compasses spun erratically, magnetic fields surged unpredictably, and digital screens flickered with static and cryptic symbols. A low hum vibrated through the stone corridors, growing louder with each step. A resonance felt deep in the bones. It was as if the temple itself was awakening, breathing with the pulse of a trapped heart. In the central chamber, the massive stone altar loomed. Its surface was fractured with deep fissures, glowing with an otherworldly blue flame, the source of the humming that now filled the air. Surrounding the altar were scattered bones, human and animal, remnants of sacrifices made to maintain the prison's fragile balance. Matteo's hand trembled as he reached to touch the altar, feeling a shock of cold that raced up his arm. A sudden tremor shook the chamber, dust falling like rain from the ancient ceiling. Shadows writhed at the edges of their vision, forming shapes that defied comprehension, grotesque and beautiful, terrifying and sorrowful. The Watcher was stirring. Matteo's voice cracked as he recited the prayers inscribed on the tablets, invoking protection and renewal of the ancient bonds. The chamber responded with a surge of energy, the blue flames flaring brighter, casting stark light and deep shadows. For a moment, the entity's hunger seemed to recede, pushed back by the fragile chains of faith and ritual. But the reprieve was brief. The altar cracked wider, the glow intensifying until it was almost blinding. The temple trembled violently, threatening to collapse, and the team scrambled to safety as stones crashed around them. Emerging from the temple's depths, the forest greeted them with an unnatural stillness. The usual sounds of life were muted, as if the jungle itself mourned what had almost been unleashed. Matteo's heart was heavy with the knowledge that the Watcher's prison was weakened. The darkness was patient, but relentless. As the sun dipped below the jagged peaks, Matteo gazed back at the temple's silhouette, a dark promise etched in stone and shadow. The secrets hidden beneath the House of Echoes were alive, waiting, hungry, a darkness that no flame could fully dispel. The days following their narrow escape from the temple's deepest chambers were marked by an unsettling quiet that seemed to stretch across the entire Andean Valley. The vibrant life of the forest had dulled, the usual chorus of birds and insects replaced by a heavy silence that pressed on the senses. Dr. Matteo Alvarez and his team set up a temporary research base near the temple's entrance, hoping to regroup and make sense of the chilling events they had endured. Matteo found himself plagued by restless nights and vivid dreams that felt more like memories. In these dreams, he wandered through a temple, alive with flickering torchlight and chanting priests, their voices rising and falling in an ancient hypnotic rhythm. He saw the Watcher not as a mere shadow, but as a vast, unknowable presence, a void that devoured light and erased existence itself. It was bound beneath the altar, its hunger restrained by chains woven from sacrifice and prayer. But these bonds were fraying. During the day, the team examined the artifacts recovered from the temple's depths, broken relics, faded parchments, inscribed with a script that defied translation, and remnants of ritual implements that pulsed faintly with residual energy. Despite their best efforts, the glyphs resisted understanding, shifting subtly as if alive, their meanings slipping just beyond reach. One afternoon, as a storm brewed over the mountain peaks, strange phenomena intensified. The team's equipment malfunctioned wildly. Compasses spun uncontrollably, cameras distorted images with flickering shadows, and electronic devices emitted bursts of static and cryptic whispers. A palpable tension filled the air, as if the temple's dark secret was reaching outward, extending its influence beyond stone and shadow. Local villagers reported unnatural occurrences as well. Herds of animals vanished, and strange lights flickered near the temple at night. Old shamans spoke of a darkness awakening, a force that could not be appeased by offerings or prayers. Fear began to take root, spreading like wildfire through the surrounding communities. Determined to prevent catastrophe, Matteo resolved to return to the temple's heart, armed not only with scientific tools, but with ancient rituals reconstructed from scattered sources. He believed that reinforcing the ancient bindings was their only hope of containing the Watcher's growing hunger. As they prepared for the descent, the storm broke, unleashing sheets of rain and a chorus of thunder that echoed through the mountains. The team moved with urgency, descending the worn steps into the temple's depths. The air was thick with moisture and the scent of ancient stone, and the flickering blue light from the altar's fissure illuminated the shadows like a dying star. In the central chamber, Matteo began the ritual, chanting words that trembled on the edge of memory. The temple responded, the glowing glyphs pulsing in rhythm with his voice, the altar's fissure beginning to close. The shadows recoiled, and a heavy silence settled over the chamber. For a moment, hope blossomed. The Watcher's hunger seemed contained, but the tremor returned, stronger this time, shaking the temple's foundations. The chains of light flickered dangerously, threatening to snap. Matteo's heart pounded as he finished the incantation, sealing the fissure once more. Exhausted but resolute, the team ascended, leaving the temple behind, for now. But outside, the storm had left the forest altered. The silence was deeper, more absolute, as if the Watcher's shadow had stretched across the land, waiting patiently for its chance to rise again. The dawn broke over the Andean peaks with a haunting stillness, the golden light brushing the temple's ancient stones like a fragile promise. Dr. Matteo Alvarez stood at the edge of the forest, gazing back at the House of Echoes. The temple loomed like a sentinel, its shadows stretching long and dark, a testament to the secrets buried beneath its stones. The ritual had sealed the Watcher's prison once again, but the victory felt fragile, as if the bindings were threads fraying at the edges of eternity. Matteo knew the entity beneath the altar was patient, eternal, its hunger unyielding. It waited in the silence, a void in the heart of the mountain, biding its time. The villagers' stories, once dismissed as superstition, took on new weight. Their warnings, etched in the fabric of their culture, were echoes of an ancient truth. Some darkness is older than memory, some secrets better left undisturbed. Matteo's team packed their equipment, their faces marked by exhaustion and reverence. The temple had changed them, its dark secrets seeping into their souls. They had glimpsed the thin veil between worlds and understood the cost of pulling it aside. As they departed, a cold wind whispered through the valley, carrying with it a faint, haunting melodian echo of the Watcher's song, a lament for the chains that bound it, and a warning for those who dared to listen. The House of Echoes stood silent once more, a sacred prison beneath the Andean sky. But the mountains hold their breath, and the shadows linger, waiting for the day the Watcher will rise again. And beneath the earth, the darkness stirs patient, eternal, and hungry. High in the mist-wreathed mountains of Central Asia, where jagged peaks pierced the clouds and winds carried whispers of forgotten empires, there stood a temple carved directly into the face of a cliff, known to the local nomadic tribes as the Sanctuary of Shadows. This sacred edifice had withstood the ravages of time, hidden from the eyes of the modern world. Its massive stone doors were sealed with iron clasps, engraved with ancient symbols, warnings, etched in a language lost to all but the oldest oral traditions. For centuries, tales circulated among the mountain people about the temple's dark origins and the power sealed within. Elders spoke of a time when the temple was built not to celebrate gods, but to imprison a force so terrible that even the bravest warriors dared not speak its name aloud. The sanctuary was said to contain a shadow entity, an eternal watcher that fed on fear and silence, a being whose release would plunge the world into an age of darkness. Dr. Anara Bakova, a historian and linguist specializing in ancient Central Asian cultures, had heard these stories in her youth, but dismissed them as myth. Yet, when an archaeological survey uncovered the temple's existence, she was compelled to join the expedition. The opportunity to explore a lost temple, rumored to guard a secret older than recorded history, was irresistible. Arriving at the base of the mountain, Anara was struck by the temple's formidable presence. The cliff face was carved with intricate bas-reliefs depicting celestial battles and figures cloaked in shadow. The stone itself seemed to absorb light, a dull sheen that shifted as the sun moved across the sky. The expedition began by examining the temple's exterior inscriptions, which bore a cryptic script that blended pictographs with stylized human forms. Despite her expertise, Anara struggled to decipher the text, which seemed layered with hidden meanings and double entendres. The inscriptions warned of a watcher beneath the stone, a guardian whose silence was both protection and curse. As the team prepared to breach the massive stone doors, Anara experienced an unsettling sensation, low vibration that thrummed through the earth and resonated within her chest. The air was charged with anticipation and something darker, a presence that seemed to watch and judge. When the doors finally yielded, revealing a yawning cavern lined with polished black stone, the explorers were met with a sudden drop in temperature. The cavern walls were etched with elaborate murals that told a story of cosmic conflict. Beings of light battling against an encroaching shadow, a war that shaped the very fabric of existence. Deep within the cavern lay an altar carved from a single block of obsidian, its surface scarred by ancient rituals. Surrounding the altar were remnants of offerings, charred bones, fragmented idols, and cryptic relics that pulsed faintly with an energy that defied explanation. The team set up camp within the cavern, their equipment humming with an uneasy energy as they prepared to delve deeper. As night fell, Anara found herself drawn to the altar, its black surface reflecting flickers of torchlight like a mirror to another realm. Her dreams that night were haunted by visions, shadowy figures whispering in a language she could almost understand, a presence lurking just beyond perception, waiting. The temple, she realized, was more than a monument. It was a prison, and the watcher was the prisoner. The cavern's chill seeped into the bones of Dr. Anara Bakova and her team as they ventured deeper into the sanctuary of shadows. Each step echoed hollowly against the obsidian walls, the faint glimmer of their torchlight casting flickering shadows that danced like specters in the vast emptiness. The air was heavy, thick with the residue of centuries, layered with whispers that brushed against their senses, teasing memories that were not their own. The murals lining the cavern walls told stories of celestial battles, of cosmic forces locked in an eternal struggle. Bright figures clad in armor, forged from starlight, clashed against creeping tendrils of darkness, amorphous and writhing, representing the insatiable hunger of the watcher. Yet, despite the violence depicted, the images carried a deeper message. The darkness was not invincible, held at bay by ancient rituals and blood sacrifices woven into the temple's very stones. Anara studied the glyphs carefully. They were unlike anything she had encountered, their meaning layered and elusive, shifting subtly as if alive. She found herself tracing the spiraling patterns, feeling a cold tingle where her fingertips brushed the carvings. The temple, she realized, was not merely a prison, but a living entity, a guardian itself, its stones infused with the power to contain what lay beneath. The team's instruments, however, betrayed a growing unease. Compass needles spun wildly, electronic devices flickered with static, and strange frequencies pulsed through their sensors. Low, droning hums interspersed with bursts of indecipherable sound. It was as if the Watcher's influence was seeping through the cracks in the prison, reaching out to reclaim its lost dominion. In the heart of the cavern, they discovered a spiral staircase carved into the rock, descending into an abyss of darkness so complete it seemed to swallow all light. The air grew colder still, biting at exposed skin, carrying an intangible weight that threatened to crush the spirit. Anara hesitated, the ancient glyphs echoing in her mind, warnings and prayers, intertwined in a language that straddled the boundary between life and death. The Watcher was patient, eternal, and hungry. Its prison was fragile, held together by threads of ritual and faith. As they descended, faint whispers rose around them, voices from beyond the veil, calling out in tones both pleading and commanding. Shadows flickered at the edge of their vision, shapes forming and dissolving like smoke in a breeze. The boundary between the physical world and the realm of shadows blurred. Reaching the chamber below, the team found an altar carved from obsidian, its surface scarred with ancient ritual marks. Around it lay the remnants of offerings, bones, broken artifacts, and a dark, viscous substance that seemed almost alive. The altar pulsed faintly with a blue light, an eerie glow that resonated with a low hum vibrating through the chamber. Anara approached cautiously, her breath catching as she felt the Watcher's presence pressing against her mind. A hunger without form, a silence so profound it swallowed thought itself. The air was thick with the weight of countless sacrifices, prayers whispered in desperation, and the fragile hope that the Watcher would remain bound. That night, as the team camped near the altar, Anara's dreams deepened. She was transported to a time long past, witnessing the temple's construction by a forgotten civilization, desperate to protect the world from the Watcher's wrath. She saw the rituals performed, the sacrifices made, and the eternal vigilance of the guardians who pledged their lives to maintain the prison as fragile seals. But she also saw the price, madness, loss, and the creeping decay of hope. The Watcher's hunger was relentless, and its chains weakened with each passing century. Awakening with a start, Anara realized the temple was awakening too, its dark secret no longer confined to stone. The Watcher stirred beneath the altar, patient and eternal, waiting for the moment when its hunger would break free. The air grew heavier as Dr. Anara Bakova and her team pressed further into the abyss beneath the sanctuary of shadows. Each step deeper felt like a descent into a forgotten world, where time folded upon itself and reality bent under the weight of ancient forces. The faint blue glow from the altar above faded, swallowed by an impenetrable darkness that seemed to absorb all light and hope. The cavern walls closed in, their polished obsidian surfaces reflecting distorted images of the explorers, twisting their shapes into shadows that moved independently. Whispers danced at the edge of hearing. Fragments of forgotten prayers, curses uttered by those long gone, and the ever-present silent hum of the watcher's restless hunger. Inara felt the oppressive presence grow stronger, a weight pressing on her chest and clouding her thoughts. Her team faltered, hesitation and fear creeping into their movements. The instruments designed to measure and record were useless here, overwhelmed by the temple's enigmatic power. Even the most skeptical among them could no longer deny the presence of something otherworldly, a force beyond science and reason. At the center of this darkness lay the heart of the prison, a chamber carved from the very mountain where the altar rose like a dark monolith. Its surface was scarred with ancient symbols, pulsating faintly with a blue light, the glow ebbing and flowing like the breath of a slumbering giant. Around the altar, the floor was littered with remnants of sacrifices, bones fractured and worn by time, relics twisted into impossible shapes, and a thick black resin that seemed to pulse with life. As Inara approached the altar, she was overcome by visions, flashes of the temple's past and future. She saw the Watcher unleashed, its tendrils spreading through the earth, devouring light and memory. Cities crumbled, skies darkened, and the world descended into silence. She saw herself and her team caught in this unfolding nightmare, their voices lost in the void. But intertwined with these horrors were glimpses of hope. Ancient guardians standing firm, rituals rekindled, and bonds reforged by the strength of human will and faith. The temple was both prison and protector, its fate intertwined with the world above. The chamber trembled suddenly, dust and small stones falling from the ceiling. The fissures in the altar's surface flared with brilliant blue light, casting jagged shadows that danced wildly. The Watcher was stirring, testing the bonds that held it. Inara and her team formed a circle around the altar. Beginning the ancient incantations they had painstakingly pieced together from fragmented texts. Their voices wavered but grew stronger, weaving prayers and commands meant to bind and repel. The air crackled with energy, the temple responding to their call. The blue glow intensified, reaching a blinding crescendo before collapsing inward, sealing the fissures and silencing the chamber once more. Exhausted, the team retreated to the surface, the oppressive darkness giving way to the cool night air and the distant cry of nocturnal creatures. The temple stood silent once again, its secrets safely locked beneath stone and shadow. Yet Inara knew the truth. The Watcher's hunger was eternal, its prison fragile. The temple was a guardian against oblivion, but it was a guardian that demanded vigilance and sacrifice. The dark secret hidden beneath the sanctuary of shadows was not merely a relic of the past. It was a living threat, waiting for the day when its chains would break and silence would fall forever. The days that followed the team's harrowing encounter within the sanctuary of shadows were marked by a creeping sense of unease that settled over the base camp like a thick fog. Dr. Inara Bekova found herself haunted not only by the temple's secrets, but by the lingering presence that seemed to seep into every corner of the mountain valley. The forest, once vibrant and alive with the calls of birds and rustling leaves, had grown silent, as if the land itself was holding its breath in fearful anticipation. Each member of the expedition felt the weight of the temple's dark secret pressing on their minds and bodies. Equipment malfunctioned inexplicably. Cameras captured distorted images of shifting shadows. Compasses spun in dizzying circles, and electronic devices emitted bursts of static laced with faint, unintelligible whispers. Some team members began reporting vivid nightmares, waking with unexplained bruises and scratches, their sleep disturbed by the echoing voice of the Watcher. Anara pored over the ancient texts and recovered artifacts with renewed urgency. The glyphs she had initially struggled to decipher now seemed to pulse with a subtle light, revealing hidden meanings as if responding to her presence. The Watcher's nature became clearer, was an entity born of darkness and silence, a void that consumed not only light, but the very memory of those who encountered it. The prison was held together by ancient rite sacrifices of blood and faith woven into the temple's fabric, a delicate balance maintained through vigilance and reverence. But the temple was old, and the bonds were weakening. Anara resolved to return to the heart of the temple for a final attempt to reinforce the ancient seals. Armed with reconstructed rituals and protective charms derived from local shamanistic traditions, she led the team back into the depths. The storm that raged outside mirrored the turmoil within their hearts, tempest of fear, hope, and determination. Descending the familiar stairways, the team was greeted by the oppressive darkness of the cavern. The blue glow of the altar's fissures flickered uncertainly, the temple itself seeming to shudder beneath their feet. The air was thick with a cold that seeped into their very bones, and the silence was absolute, broken only by the soft incantations of the team as they prepared the ritual space. Anara began the chant, her voice steady despite the tremors that rippled through the stone. The team joined, their words weaving a tapestry of ancient power designed to bind and protect. The altar responded, the fissures sealing slowly as a brilliant light radiated outward, casting the chamber in a pure, cleansing glow. For a brief moment, the Watcher's hunger seemed to be held at bay, but the temple trembled violently, the walls groaning as if in pain. Dust and debris fell like rain, and the shadows at the edges of their vision deepened and twisted. The Watcher fought against its chains with a fury born of eternal torment. Anara's heart pounded as she pushed forward, pouring every ounce of will into the ritual. The glow intensified, burning away the darkness like a beacon of hope. The fissures sealed completely, and the temple fell silent once more. Exhausted but triumphant, the team ascended to the surface. The forest welcomed them with a tentative breeze, carrying the scent of rain and new beginnings. The Watcher was bound again, but Anara knew that this was only a temporary reprieve. The temple's dark secret remained, a warning etched in stone and shadow. Some darkness is eternal, some hunger insatiable. Vigilance must never falter, for beneath the sanctuary of shadows, the Watcher waits, patient, eternal, and hungry. As the first pale light of dawn touched the rugged peaks surrounding the sanctuary of shadows, Dr. Anara Bakova stood silently at the temple's entrance. The morning mist curled through the valley like a restless spirit, shrouding the ancient stones in a veil of secrecy. The forest, once eerily silent, began to stir with the tentative songs of birds and the rustling of leaves, as if nature itself exhaled a cautious breath. The night's ritual had sealed the Watcher's prison once again, binding the darkness with chains woven from faith, sacrifice, and the unwavering resolve of those who refuse to forget. Yet, as Anara gazed upon the temple's weathered facade, she knew this victory was but a fleeting moment in an unending struggle. The Watcher was not a mere entity trapped beneath stone. It was a force older than memory, a hunger that transcended time and space. It existed in the shadows between worlds, waiting patiently for the fragile bonds that held it to unravel. The temple was both prison and guardian, a monument to humanity's defiance in the face of oblivion. The villagers' whispered legends now echoed clearly in Anara's mind, their warnings carved into the fabric of culture and history. The sacrifices, the rituals, the eternal vigil, they were threads in a tapestry designed to keep the darkness at bay. But every thread frayed with time, and every shadow lengthened with neglect. Her team prepared to depart, their faces etched with exhaustion, reverence, and a newfound respect for the temple's dark secret. The expedition had changed them irrevocably. They had glimpsed the thin veil separating worlds and understood the terrible price of peeling it back. As they journeyed away from the mountain, Anara carried with her the weight of the Watcher's legacy, a responsibility to remember, to warn, and to protect. The knowledge gained was a double-edged sword, a beacon of truth that illuminated the darkness while revealing its depths. The temple's silhouette faded behind them, a silent sentinel standing guard beneath the ever-shifting sky. The dark secret hidden beneath the temple was a reminder. Some forces are not meant to be disturbed, some darkness not meant to be unleashed. Yet humanity's curiosity, its insatiable thirst for knowledge, will always push boundaries, beckoning the shadows to dance once more. The question lingered like a whispered prayer in the mountain wind. How long before the Watcher's hunger breaks free and silence falls forever? Deep in the dense jungles of Southeast Asia, where ancient trees stretched their gnarled roots into the earth like fingers clutching secrets, there lay a temple lost to time. The locals called it the Vale of Shadows, a place whispered about in hushed tones, a sacred site believed to be both a gateway and a prison. It was said that beneath its moss-covered stones rested a secret so dark that even the bravest shaman dared not approach after sunset. The temple's silhouette was swallowed by the jungle canopy, its crumbling walls entwined with vines and orchids, nature's reclaiming touch, slowly erasing the legacy of a civilization forgotten. Its architecture was unlike anything recorded, a blend of soaring spires and subterranean chambers, carved with symbols that pulsed faintly as if alive. The carvings depicted celestial beings entwined in cosmic battles, serpents coiling through realms both mortal and divine, and eyes that seemed to follow intruders, watching, waiting. Dr. Layla Nader, an archaeologist specializing in Southeast Asian mysticism, had long been fascinated by stories surrounding the Vale of Shadows. Legends told of an ancient cult that once worshipped a being known only as the Silent One, a force of darkness and silence said to dwell beneath the temple, feeding on fear and the secrets whispered in the dark. When satellite imagery revealed the temple's true extent, buried beneath layers of jungle and earth, Leela joined an international expedition determined to uncover its mysteries, and not even the light of day could banish the shadows it cast. As the team hacked through thick underbrush and climbed mossy steps worn by centuries, Layla felt a palpable change in the air. The jungle seemed to hush, the usual chorus of wildlife muted, as if the land itself held its breath. Upon entering the temple's outer sanctum, they were greeted by walls adorned with intricate bas-relief scenes of sacrifice, celestial battles, and guardians binding a darkness beneath stone. The first nights were restless. Strange sounds echoed through the temple's corridors, whispers in forgotten tongues, footsteps where none should be, and an oppressive silence that seemed to swallow all else. The deeper they ventured, the more the temple revealed its secrets, hidden passageways leading to vast underground chambers, altars stained with ancient blood, and inscriptions warning of a darkness that consumes light and memory alike. Leela's dreams were haunted by visions of the Silent One, an endless void, eyes closed, but sensing everything, a presence that demanded silence as both offering and warning. In the depths of the temple, beneath layers of stone and shadow, the Silent One waited, patient and eternal. The expedition faced growing unease as equipment malfunctioned and members reported unexplained visions. The jungle outside whispered warnings, the veil of shadows tightening its grasp around those who dared to unveil its hidden truths. Leela knew their journey was only beginning, and the dark secret beneath the veil of shadows was a force that would test the limits of faith, courage, and the human mind. The oppressive silence of the Veil of Shadows weighed heavily on Dr. Layla Nader as she and her team ventured deeper into the temple's ancient heart. The narrow passageways wound like serpents beneath the jungle floor, carved from dark stone that seemed to absorb every flicker of their torchlight. Each step echoed hollowly, swallowed quickly by the cavernous spaces that whispered of forgotten rituals and lingering dread. The walls were alive with carvings, intricate bas-reliefs depicting celestial battles, shadowy figures enshrouded in mist, and the Silent One itself, a formless void whose presence was felt rather than seen. These images spoke of cosmic balance, of forces held in uneasy truce, and the terrible price paid to maintain that balance. The Silent One was not just a prisoner, but a force essential to the world's hidden order, a darkness that must never be released. The language was an ancient dialect, a blend of lost tongues with cryptic symbols, layered like a puzzle designed to protect knowledge from unworthy eyes. The glyphs spoke of guardians who sacrificed their lives to bind the Silent One beneath the temple, weaving magic and faith into chains of stone and shadow. As the team pressed on, strange phenomena intensified. Their equipment faltered, compasses spun wildly, cameras captured flickering shadows. The atmosphere thickened, charged with an energy that defied explanation. One night, as the jungle around their camp settled into an uneasy quiet, Leela was drawn to a hidden chamber revealed by a collapsed wall. Inside, she found an altar carved from obsidian, its surface scarred with ritual markings glowing faintly in the torchlight. Surrounding the altar were fragments of offerings, bones, shards of pottery, and a dark, viscous substance that seemed almost alive. As she approached, a chill ran through her spine. The Silent One's presence pressed against her mind like a heavy fog, whispering secrets in a language just beyond understanding. Visions flooded her consciousness, visions of the temple's builders, of rituals performed under blood-red moons, and the eternal watchfulness required to keep the darkness bound. The temple was a living entity, a guardian and a prison intertwined. It demanded vigilance and sacrifice, a debt paid through faith and fear. Back at camp, the team grappled with growing unease. Several members reported disturbing dreams, visions of shadowy figures, endless voids, and voices calling from beneath the earth. Physical ailments appeared, unexplained bruises, sudden chills, and bouts of dizziness. The temple's dark secret was reaching out, its hunger palpable. Layla knew they were on the brink of a revelation that could alter humanity's understanding of darkness and light, faith and fear, power and sacrifice. But the question lingered: was the price of unveiling these secrets worth the cost? The temple's shadow deepened as Dr. Layla Nader and her team ventured further into the labyrinth beneath the Veil of Shadows. The air grew colder, thick with a silence so absolute it seemed to swallow every sound breath. Footsteps, even the beating of their own hearts. The faint glow of their torches barely pierced the darkness, revealing walls etched with symbols that pulsed faintly, as if alive with an ancient energy. Layla traced her fingers along the carvings' depictions of celestial serpents entwined with shadowy figures, scenes of cosmic struggle where light battled darkness for dominion over worlds. The Silent One loomed at the center, a formless void, its presence suggested rather than shown. Its gaze felt like an unseen weight pressing upon the soul. The team's instruments faltered, compasses spun without direction. It was as if the temple itself was alive, resisting their intrusion, warning them to turn back. Yet the drive for discovery pushed them onward. In a vast chamber carved from obsidian, they found the altar of Binanan, immense stone, slabs scarred with ancient incantations and surrounded by relics of sacrifice. The air here was thick with a palpable tension, the very stones humming with power. Bones, both human and animal, lay scattered around, remnants of offerings made across countless generations. Leela's mind flooded with visions, the temple's builders performing rituals beneath blood-red moons, invoking the forces that held the Silent One captive. She saw the toll their vigilance exacted, madness, despair, and endless sacrifice, all to keep the darkness chained. A sudden tremor shook the chamber, dust cascading from the vaulted ceiling. The altar's glyphs flared with an eerie blue light, the shadows at the edges of their vision twisting and writhing. The Silent One stirred, testing the fragile bonds that held it. The team gathered, voices rising in unison to chant the ancient incantations reconstructed from the temple's texts. Their words wove a protective web of power, a barrier against the encroaching void. The chamber pulsed with energy, the blue light intensifying until it blazed like a beacon, driving back the shadows. For a fleeting moment, hope flickered, but the struggle was far from over. The temple trembled, stones shifting, as if the mountain itself protested their intrusion. The Silent One's hunger was eternal, its prison fragile. The dark secret beneath the veil of shadows was a burden passed through the ages, a warning etched in stone and sacrifice. Layla knew their journey was only the beginning. The Watcher waited, patient and eternal, beneath the veilet's hunger insatiable, its silence deafening. The temple's heartbeat pulsed beneath their feet as Dr. Leela Nader and her team prepared to face the Silent One once more. The cavernous chamber echoed with the weight of countless sacrifices, the air thick with the residue of ancient rituals. Leela could feel the Watcher's hunger pressing against her Minda, vast, consuming void that threatened to unravel the fabric of reality itself. The Silent One was more than a force. It was an absence, a silence so profound it erased memory and hope alike. The team began the ritual to reinforce the prison's bindings, their voices weaving ancient incantations passed down through fragmented texts and oral traditions. Each word carried power, a fragile thread holding back the encroaching darkness. The altar's carvings glowed faintly, resonating with the energy of their chant. But the Watcher did not relent. The chamber trembled violently, dust and small stones raining from the vaulted ceiling. Shadows twisted and writhed, taking on forms that defied comprehension. Beings of smoke and silence, eyes without faces, limbs that stretched into infinity. One by one, team members faltered, overwhelmed by visions of despair and oblivion. The darkness sought to claim their minds, to draw them into its endless void. Leela's resolve wavered, her thoughts threatened by the consuming silence. Summoning every ounce of strength, she pushed back, focusing on the ancient words, the power of faith and will. The ritual's glow intensified, the altar's fissures sealing as light battled shadow in a desperate dance. As the final words left their lips, a blinding light engulfed the chamber, the darkness recoiling with a scream that echoed through the temple and beyond. The silence shattered, replaced by a roar of wind and the distant cry of the jungle. Exhausted and shaken, the team emerged from the temple's depths to find the jungle alive once more, the birds singing, leaves rustling, and the air warm with the promise of dawn. The Silent One was bound again, its hunger held at bay by threads of faith and sacrifice. But Layla knew the truth. The darkness was eternal, its silence unending. The veil of shadows was a guardian and a warning, a dark secret hidden beneath stone and vine. Their journey was far from over. The Watcher waited patiently, eternal and hungry, beneath the veil. The first light of dawn spilled over the dense canopy surrounding the veil of shadows, casting golden hues upon the temple's weathered stones. Dr. Layla Nader stood quietly at the temple's entrance, the weight of what they had faced pressing heavily upon her soul. The jungle around them stirred back to life, the vibrant chorus of birds, the rustling of leaves, the distant roar of waterfalls. Yet beneath this awakening, a profound silence lingered, a silence that whispered of secrets too dark to fully reveal. The night's ritual had woven a fragile thread of light across the temple's heart, binding the Silent One once again in its eternal prison. But Leela knew this was but a momentary reprieve. The force beneath the temple was ancient beyond reckoning, a void that consumed not just light but memory and hope. It was a darkness not meant to be disturbed, a secret buried beneath layers of stone and shadow, whispered in legends and locked away by blood and sacrifice. As the expedition packed their equipment and prepared to leave, Layla felt the profound responsibility settle upon her. They had glimpsed the edges of a truth that could unravel, the very fabric of human understanding, the balance between light and shadow, faith and fear, life and oblivion. The local villagers' warnings now echoed clearly in her mind. Their rituals, their prayers, and their eternal vigilance were more than superstition. They were the last bastion against a darkness that sought to erase existence itself. The temple was a guardian, a sacred prison, and a warning etched in stone. The journey back through the jungle was heavy with silence, each step echoing with the knowledge that the Watcher remained patient, eternal, and hungry. Its chains held for now, but the hunger never waned. Leela resolved to carry this knowledge forward, to honor the sacrifices of those who had come before, and to ensure that the temple's dark secret would never be forgotten. For some darkness must remain sealed, some silence must be kept, and some hunger must never be fed. Beneath the veil of shadows, the Silent One stirred in its eternal watch, waiting for the day when the fragile bonds would falter and silence would fall forever. Thanks for watching, everyone. If the dark secrets beneath sacred temples fascinated you, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more mysterious journeys. Share your thoughts below. What temple mystery intrigues you most? Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.